So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the Planning Board this evening. Thanks for being here. I've had a request just to move some things around on the agenda because we do have some people here for our articles as well too. So I've had a request from staff and a few of the commissioners to move the warrant articles first. So if you guys are good with that change, I'd take a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously. Thank you, and thank you for allowing us to do that. So, what I'm going to do at this point is, with the warrant articles, I usually like to turn it over to staff initially, then the board will comment, and then just raise your hand if you want to be heard when I open up the public hearing. So, Andrew, Leslie, let's go to Article 57, which is a zoning map change from LUG 2 to residential 40 for properties on South Shore Road, and this is a citizen's petition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm waiting for that map. I think this is not this one, Holly. It's the one further down. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Holly. You were right the first time. Go back to that. 59 is the is that one. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, board members, so there's 4 lots here. This is the property directly south of the Housing Authority property. You've seen this particular property before. I'm trying to remember why if we held this off because we didn't have the map, maybe?
No, we had a map.
You had the map?
Yeah. We had nobody to represent.
Arthur wasn't here.
And
Arthur wasn't here.
And the
I believe that was the reason. Yeah, it was.
okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right.
So the proponent of this, don't see the
Still
proponent
not here.
here. So,
Anyways. Staff comment or?
we think it's a reasonable article. The area outlined in purple is existing R40. Again, it's between the existing high density of the Housing Authority property. There's been discussion, we haven't seen the final plans, for some sort of a cluster type development on this, which would work well. R40 is the lowest density district in the town overlay district, and this area is serviced by water and sewer. So.
Yeah, I'm going to recuse myself, Mr. Chairman.
Duly noted at this point.
There's 3 people left to...
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, got it. So, board members, any discussion at this point? And if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to comment on this? No? So, what's the pleasure of the board?
I guess we could close this one out because, it's kind of simple, I think. I don't think we need to have Arthur here for this,
Okay.
right?
No.
Okay.
It's, it really is a board decision.
Yeah, well, no, but you know what I mean.
I
So
understand. I hear you.
I would make a motion to close public hearing.
I'll second that. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have
Make a
unanimously.
motion to give Article 57 a positive recommendation.
Perfect. I'll second that. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously. Great. Brings us to Article 58, which is an amendment to place a portion of property located at 3 South Shore Road, currently located in the Country Overlay District, in the Town Overlay District, and this is a citizen's petition.
Mr. Chairman, in order to be consistent with your vote on 57, this would put the rear portion of one of the lots into the Town Overlay District. So we would recommend, based on your vote on 57, that you give 58 a positive recommendation.
Okay.
I'll recuse.
You're going to recuse on this?
What's the
Yeah.
same
I understand.
property.
Yeah. Okay. Do you guys have anything? You good? Yep. Is anyone in the audience want to comment on this? Seeing no comment.
I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
Second. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously, and pleasure of the board.
Make a motion for a positive recommendation. 58.
Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, and the ayes have it unanimously, which brings us to Article 59. This is a change from the LUG 2 to LUG 1 for properties on South Shore Road. Again, this is a citizen's petition. Andrew?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not
Please.
sure if there's owners of this area present. This area is different from the other portion of South Shore that you just looked at. This is an area closer to the wastewater treatment plant, which
Yeah.
is the LUG 3, the brown area to the south. It's an area that we avoided in the original change to LUG 1 in articles in 2015. This area is not served by water or sewer, and the particular shape of the lots don't actually lend themselves to any sort of further division. So, based on the character here, it's up to you, but I think that we're not in favor of this.
So, board members, any discussion?
Doesn't have the frontage.
Well,
The bowling alley.
the bowling alley,
Well, they look like bowling alleys.
we used to have a bowling alley.
I know, I like the
Three,
bowling alley.
Can I just ask staff?
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Without, Andrew, I mean, the other side of the road, it said the residents haven't come in for that yet, or, when we say that sewer, it doesn't serve by sewer, well, it's not, but it's right next to the sewer plant, but it's not served because of the pressure main. We already had that conversation at the last meeting. I think that this area is, headed in the lug 1 direction for the most part. But maybe we're not quite ready for this yet, or more of a comprehensive look at it for all of it.
So why wouldn't we
More than just one.
not approve it and wait until next year?
Well, no, I'm not saying
Properly.
I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I'm just saying it's going to continue to come back to here, one way or the other, whether it's through planning or whether it's through a citizen or another citizen, And that's how I see this area continuing to, move towards lug 1 way or the other. So, I mean, I'm fine with a negative for this year, but I think it's going to be back, or in some fashion.
Let's cross that bridge when we get there. I'm fine
Yeah.
with a negative for now.
So,
Did you have anything, sir?
Yeah, I'm voting against it.
Okay. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a public hearing. If anyone would like to comment on this. Seeing no comments at this point?
I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, motion's made and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously. And the pleasure of the board.
The terminology for, I can make a motion for a negative.
Negative finding, yeah.
Yeah.
Finding.
Okay, great.
I'll second
What do you
it.
want to do?
Motion's made and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously. That brings us to Article 60. This is a
We're
sign
doing
map
these
change
first,
from
'cause people
LUG
here.
2 to R40 for properties on Evergreen Way. This is a citizen's petition.
So, Mr. Chairman, the map shows that there are 3 parcels that are bracketed on 2 sides by the existing R40. These parcels are in the town overlay district. They're also within the sewer district. They are bordered to the north by R20 properties. So again, if this is looked at part of a an area that gradually changes, this would be consistent with earlier actions that we've taken. And this is, again, these 3 on the north side. There's a separate article that deals with property on the south side.
Okay,
The one
Yeah.
to the right of it, did that get changed at the last meeting?
They didn't want to go.
The one on the upper, at
Oh,
the,
the upper one.
the
Okay,
special
yeah, yeah,
town-
it was one up one. Yeah, yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Did you say that they were on sewer? They're in the,
They're in the sewer district. There is no there is sewer close, or
Right
there could
behind
be
them.
easements coming through surrounding properties.
Okay.
But they are within the sewer district.
I don't have an issue with this at all.
Anyone else on the board? This is a public hearing, ladies and gentlemen. If anyone would like to comment on this? Seeing no comment,
Motion to close the public hearing?
do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes
I'm
have it.
opposed, I'm opposed.
Oh, sorry.
Motion to approve,
Positive.
but make a positive recommendation.
Okay.
Second.
Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed?
I'm opposed. I'm not opposed to this. To the public hearing.
Got it. Okay, I get you.
You can go.
So, next thing is Article 16-1. This is a change from LUG 2 to LUG 1 for properties located on Evergreen Way, and this is a citizen's petition again.
So, Mr. Chairman, the area is outlined in red on the map behind you. This is the south side of Evergreen. This was considered as part of the potential R40 in a prior article. This is in the town overlay district currently, but not in the sewer district. The LUG 1 is the same basic lot size as R40, but steps down in terms of ground cover, so it goes from 10 to 7%. So again, the argument in favor of this is that it's a transitional area. At some point, we would want to change it into the country overlay district so it would match the LUG status if this were to be approved. That could be done at a subsequent meeting if the board supports it. So.
Board members, any thought? Yeah. Good, Joe.
What do you think about it, Andrew?
I think, well, I don't think that, I think it's a reasonable end to the 1 acre at that location. And I think because it's somewhat self-regulated with its lot sizes and because it's going to stay on septic, so it is certainly a gradual, reduction of zoning as you get further south. I think the skyline and that other area should stay where it is at the 2 acre. So it's sort of, where does the line go? Is the line up at the edge of Evergreen, or is it down, along the back property line? I mean, I think that in general, we try to keep neighborhoods sort of in the same district. The same side of the road is basically, the same basic lot size. So, either way. It's your decision.
That's what you get paid the big bucks for.
Comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know the proponents are here, so I think it's a reasonable thing because we've been doing it all over the boulevard, all over SRT properties, all the way down to Surfside. We've been rezoning as they move along, as times changed. This is an already built-out area, whether it's 8 bedrooms on 1 septic or 2 lots with 4. It's the same thing. Some of them can't subdivide anyway because of the width of the lots. But it goes from Richmond, which is heavy duty, right there on the left, to R40, to LUG 1, to LUG 2. We usually don't jump big time from little lots to big lots. We've been trying to correct that for a long, long time. So it makes sense to let these, they're all year-round people, let them all subdivide into 2 smaller acres or work it out with their neighbors that they put a road in, but I think some of them are too small to even subdivide, so it makes sense to go to 1 acre.
Anyone else? So this is a public hearing, ladies and gentlemen. If anyone would like to comment on this? Seeing no comments?
He's here, but
Well, come on down to the microphone, introduce yourself, and tell us where you live, please. Because this gets recorded for the TV as well.
I believe
Thank
he's the
you.
proponent.
Lindsay Knapp, 16 Evergreen Way.
Hi.
Hi there. And, I think it makes sense not to have the acreage jump around from, the high density of Richmond to, 2 acre lots. Then not 2 acre lots, but then on the other side of the street to go to 1 acre lot. So it seems to me in a transitional area like that, you'd have it continue all the way down the road and have the line be at the back of the property rather than at the street. Just, I think, seems to make sense and gives homeowners on that street the ability to do what they want if they're able to subdivide or not. Nice to have options.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Lindsay, stay at the microphone for a second. Did you talk to all the people on your side?
I talked to quite a few of them, not every single one.
There's one that said doesn't live here on the end, but you talked to most everybody else,
Yep.
and they all want to go there?
Nobody outwardly said that they were against it, or
Okay.
I think you'd see them here.
And I know some of the opposition people on your side of the street are no longer opposed.
Correct.
That's the biggest issue, because when it came in last year or the year before, that guy was opposed, he's now not opposed, because of what's happening right next to him.
Great. Anyone else wishing to comment, please? Hi.
Jim Cook, 8 Evergreen Way. I was at the last meeting and just wanted to state the same thing I stated last time. I'm for it. I've talked to my neighbors. Most of them are for it. Just wanted to let you know I agree with Linda, her point about it making sense going from the smaller to the larger lots. So
Okay,
that's
great.
it. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Pleasure of the board.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Do I hear a second? Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously,
I'll
and
make a motion to make a favorable recommendation.
got it. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously. Brings us to Article 62. This is a change from R20 and LUG2 to LUG1 for properties on Woodland Drive and Skyline Drive. Again, this is a citizen's petition. Andrew, Lindsay, do you have this?
Oh, yeah, we couldn't find a number for him.
Right. We weren't
He's
able
usually
to
away.
reach him
Uh-huh.
on this particular article. I don't know if you want to continue this or
He may be coming back.
we still have hearings coming up on other articles on the 13th.
I'll make a motion to continue it to the 13th.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
We'll find a number for him somewhere.
Great. All right, last but not least, which is Article 65. This is a change to adjust zoning district boundaries where lots are located within more than one zoning district. This is a bunch of miscellaneous locations, so.
This one, I think, I know we did not have a map last time, so.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
So there's one location out here in Squam, and then there's one or another group of them on Hummock Pond Road. So this one, you can see that there's an old LUG1 line, which was just a dimensional line off of Squam Road. So it puts portions of that property into LUG1 and the main area in LUG3. Split lots create all kinds of problems. Calculation problems. There's been a little bit of changing interpretation, which is people have been okay and then not okay. So here what we would do is put the entire property into the LUG1 zoning district. It has minimal frontage that comes out onto Squam Road and has wetlands, so we're not worried about this opening up a lot of new development. It just makes it consistent with its developed neighbors along Squam. The next group
Where on Hummock?
Must be before that, because that's the end of the,
Yeah, that's the end of it.
There we
there
go.
you go.
There you go.
Left one.
So we have two things going on out here. We have a zoning line that followed we think, an old contour line, which is why that line is going through all the properties. So we have some properties in LUG2, partially in LUG3, and in R20. As you know, this area is the country overlay district, so R20 is a mismatch here. The intent is to consolidate all of these properties into one village residential district, which is, as you can see, the majority of most of these properties, except maybe that one on the end, are in a 20,000 square foot zone now. The village residential adds greater greater setbacks. This is not in the height overlay district, is it here? So it's not. It could be. It would be affected by the pool change if that is in fact voted, and it reduces the ground cover from 12.5% to 10%. So again, that fits the development here. So again, rather than have these three different zoning districts on a single property, consolidate them into the VR.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recuse myself.
Duly noted, sir.
He's a client of mine.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I have to recuse myself on this one. I can vote on the other one, but not this one.
Gotcha. Okay, so do you guys have any comment?
I do have just one to support Andrew. This years and years and years ago, when the ZBA was dealing with the ones that are now in the water or no longer there, this issue of that squiggly line came up, and there was a really old map somewhere, and it was following the contour lines at the time.
The bar-
So I've already been through that once.
Yep.
So mostly around the pond,
Yep.
all the way down.
Okay.
So yeah, I think this is a great idea.
Anyone else? It's a public hearing, ladies and gentlemen. If anyone would like to comment on this, Mr. Collier.
You should be in favor of this.
Well, let's see what he's got to say.
Whatever you say, Linda.
Whatever. Let's see what he's got to say first.
Cormac Collier, Nantucket Land Council. For map 2, I guess I'm just, because of its close proximity to the pond and all the work that we've been doing with the town on the pond, I guess the one, let me actually state that I agree with fixing these. I've always been telling Andrew that, running the lines on contour lines was crazy. We agreed on that and getting these changed. I guess I'm just concerned maybe about the potential for future subdivision off of that paper road, particularly for the third one in from the right, which is Jim Pilata's. And then I don't know if Mr. Is it Thornburg or whatever? Thornburg. If he did do a subdivision already I think he did. So I think he's already has a subdivision in that R20. So whatever, maybe Nate can put that on so we can sort of see what that looks like as well. But I'm not necessarily opposed to it right now. I'm just curious in terms of what the potential subdivision is, primarily for Jim's and then the one next to it, which I think is Seth and Angela's mother or something, Rayner's relation.
So, Mr. Chairman, if they have subdivision potential now, they would have it afterwards.
Correct.
It's
Yeah.
R20 now, it would
Yeah.
be VR. Again, the frontage requirement is actually increased under VR from the current R20. So, but that road does not qualify any longer. That road is not built, does not qualify as a subdivision road.
Great.
So,
That answers that one. Map 1. I'm pretty sure that there actually is a paper road that runs all the way down on the left side through Confound property. It's a paper road, or they have an easement, which I don't think they could subdivide off the easement, but I'm pretty sure there is a paper road. It just was never put on the maps. It's a total combined lot of 3 acres, so they could subdivide potentially off the back where it's now lug 3 and then create the frontage for the lug 1 off the front. I'm not going to put forth a position. I just would offer that the Squam folks that were so instrumental in terms of working with the town on changing all the zoning, that they be aware of this so that it's not called and crazy things go on at town meeting, okay?
Yep.
It's just that, just so they're aware and of it.
I don't think, through you, Mr. Chairman, that back access is not going to qualify for frontage.
Won't qualify? Okay. Great, thank you.
It's running through wetlands, I
Great.
believe. You'll never get it.
It runs that right where the house is.
Yeah.
It's not wet.
Well, getting to
North.
it,
It's south of that is where it's wet, Mr. Chairman. That's all.
Great, thank you, I do appreciate it. Anyone else wishing to comment on these? Pleasure of the board.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion. There you go, discussion, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have it unanimously at 3-0.
Motion to make a favorable recommendation.
Second.
Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have it unanimously with Mark Trudell recused. Great, thank you, everyone. Taking care of that. Okay. So thank you for allowing us to deal with that brief interlude. That's going to bring us to the Richmond Great Point Development LLC applications at this point. There are 3 applications that are before you right
We only
now.
got one. We got Sandpiper 1.
No, you've got 40
Meadows two.
40-16, 53-16,
Is
and
this the
54.
supplemental stuff? I got too many emails to even figure it out.
If you look at the agenda.
I know it's on the agenda. I'm talking about what we got emailed. We got
Well-
one thing emailed, one.
I'll tell you what.
And I got additional stuff here, but I don't know how that fits into all the other stuff.
Well, I'm a little confused because there's still an agenda before you at this point. And the agenda pretty clearly states that there are 3 special permits that are coming before us at this point. So I'll tell you what.
It does, but Barry, we only got one that I saw, a Sandpiper 1 decision, as opposed to 3 or 4 decisions.
Well, let me get some clarity here from Mr. Arminetti and Ms. Rogadine, who are the applicants for this at this point, and see what they can shed and bring to light. So, if you don't mind, I'm gonna, yeah, thank you, Mr. Arminetti.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members, staff, neighbors. Dave Arminetti, Director of Real Estate Development for Richmond Great Point Development and the Richmond Company, Inc. With us tonight, as the chairman indicated, is Patty Roggeveen, our Director of Community Relations and Co-Director of Development. Mr. Paston's traveling tonight. He wanted to be here but could not, but he sends his regards. And Mr. Reed, I believe, is on family business in Maryland, so he couldn't join us tonight. Perhaps I can clarify the additional material that was sent in advance of this meeting.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, that might help start to guide the discussion, and then we could do a brief presentation at your discretion. There's no new decision drafts that were distributed per se. Those are the same that you've had for about 2.5 weeks. What we did send in, I believe, Tuesday right before the close of business, that I believe the staff got out Tuesday evening to the board, if I'm not mistaken, was just 2 additional conditions that we believe are appropriate for the Sandpiper 1 and 2 single-family developments, which is on one page, 2 freestanding conditions that we believe would be appropriate to discuss and potentially add to your drafts. But there's no wholesale new drafts or substantial new material. We have 3 new exhibits this evening, 2 of which were specifically requested by the board at last Thursday's hearing, and one of which Patty's been working diligently on with our engineer to show some potential driveway and off-street parking illustrations that we think will be helpful. So there's not a lot of new material. Mainly it's 3 new exhibits and 2 new potential conditions that are 1 paragraph apiece that I think the board has discussed conceptually in some fair detail, and certainly the staff has. So it maybe looks like it's more new stuff than it actually is.
Okay.
I don't have anything to make a decision on today, so end of story for me.
Duly noted. Do you have anything else, Mr. Arminetti?
We can take you through the material if that's appropriate. I think in particular, perhaps the driveway and parking, and that relates a little bit to the landscaping, might be helpful because it was a focus of both the board and the staff in the last few weeks, if that's appropriate.
I am yielding to you, sir, a little bit.
He's on the corner side.
I'll just take you through a couple of the first exhibits, and then I think Patty can make a more substantial description and discussion. I guess if you could first, Holly, perhaps go to the phasing diagram with the numbers on it. That was just an update to the phasing diagram that we had done that showed just lines and not numbers of lots, but we put the actual numbers of the individual lots on there. The 8 workforce, housing, rental communities for the Meadows 2 225-unit rental apartments, and then the 96 total individual lots within both of the Sandpiper developments, 94 of which are buildable lots, one of which is an open space lot, and one of which is the proposed roadway lot. That's this diagram that we sent in the last day or so, but the phasing diagram the board's had before them for a couple of weeks.
Yep.
That just might be helpful for reference purposes if there's a discussion about specific lots. There it is. That's the one from last week, without the lot numbers. Sorry, Holly.
Concepts.
Yeah, do you need to ask him a question about these?
I have a billion questions, but keep going.
Okay.
I'm not making a decision today.
Go
I
ahead,
guess
Mr.
primarily that exhibit proves that we can all count to 100. The second one is a existing conditions exhibit that focuses on the existing Nancy Ann Lane frontage, which we submitted a couple days ago. The board had specifically requested this last week when the discussion started to evolve about the landscaping plan and how it correlates to the existing lots on the the west side of Nancy Ann Lane, which are mainly existing storage, exterior tenants, landscapers, contractors, and then a series of commercial and light industrial properties, such as the Pepsi warehouse, the Sales Seafood warehouse, the Structures Unlimited shed shop, and some of the structures affiliated and associated with that. And the purpose of that was to illustrate the concept that the board discussed last week, which is of about that 950-foot length, more than half of that frontage is open curb cuts for these existing businesses and tenants. So there's very little opportunity there in the near term to really change that streetscape. But we did want to reiterate, and Mr. Paston specifically wanted to reiterate, we are committed even in the short term before those properties turn over and develop, whether they be ours or other owners, to add some landscaping in there. We can probably get one tree per lot in along there, 8 or 9 additional new trees, and dress up the streetscape a little bit, perhaps with some of the fencing and landscaping elements that we've already put in. But that's probably as far as we can go until those properties come into you for further discretionary review, because those are active businesses. There's a fair amount of truck traffic in and out of there, and they need the turning radius to get in their properties. So this exhibit shows the existing aerial in the background, the lot lines in blue, the owners in black text, an overlay of the proposed Meadows 2 rental community on the lower half of the drawing, and then down at the bottom is a blow-up in plan view of the actual street, showing the right-of-way dimensions and the exact locations of the curb cuts as they exist. So there's over 500 feet of open curb cuts on that side of the street, which totals about 950 linear feet. And then there's the driveway and off-street parking exhibit that really relates to the Sandpiper 1 house lots. And Patty has been working with the engineer on that and has done quite a bit of reconnaissance, and I think it would be helpful if the board would take a little presentation on that specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patty Roggebine with Richmond Great Point Development. I wanted to add a little to my colleague Dave's introduction to say that after we met last Thursday, we did meet at length with Mr. Vorse to talk about the next phase of our conversation here tonight, which is the special permit phase and of the single-family homes and of the apartments. In that conversation, we were, again, made fully aware of a theme that has run through our discussions with Mr. Vorse, which is that the planning board wants to be careful and be sure that as we develop, and I'm focusing now on the single-family homes, I should say Sandpiper 1 and 2, that as we develop these lots, sell these lots, that we have the capacity to basically have site review by the planning board, so that we're not, the goal being that we're not in position to have these appear as row houses, to be honest. So we're looking to diversify the neighborhood. We're looking to diversify the both the structures, the location of the structures, the locations of the driveways, that we put within this development, and that we will do our very best to make sure that it is, at the end of the day, reflective of a development that has been in place for a number of years rather than just kind of plopped on a road. So in that vein, we're given sort of the task, and you can see in the condition 1 or the supplemental proposed conditions, just that kind of language, that basically we worked with our attorneys, we worked with counsel to make sure that we weren't going to overbind or underbind, to give you the leverage and the flexibility, and to give the owners of these lots the same, but at the same time make sure that we would get to the end game. And so that is what you see in the lot configuration review in terms of the language. One parcel of that, of course, is the driveway, and that's a very big part of that. House placement is something else, but obviously where the driveways are located, in many respects, dictate a lot of how the lot will present. I did some work on. I sort of drove around on Sunday and took some pictures of kind of typical configurations that exist around the island, and in many respects, I sort of tried to focus on areas of relatively new and old housing, and even went out to Nantucket, to Ridge Road, where it's a sort of different configuration, but the houses, because of the agreement out there, the houses are closer together, although there's still, zoned to be, because there's community space. At any rate, the configurations that we saw are kind of mapped out there, both by the engineers and within the pictures. There's a very common one in your upper right-hand corner, increasingly common, where you basically allow the owner to pull up against the side of the house as well as have a front bump, so that you can easily get 2 cars in and out without having to go outside and move the car that's blocking the others. And at the same time, it has been, as you see in that picture, commonly it's screened very nicely, so that the hedging or what you might get on the roadside allows that car to be hidden, so that your first view is not of cars lined up all the way down the road, but instead the landscape is very well managed to not obviously block the cars, but to their access, but to block the cars from the visual view. So we saw that a lot. We saw that where the homes were actually flush closer to the, as you can see in that demonstration up there in the right-hand corner, to the center with the parking on the sides. We also saw in that sort of that venue where the houses were actually moved to farther apart, so you can mix that up a little bit. The one that we've presented today, I think, is a nice one, but you can also allow the homes to stagger a little bit and still use that same, what we would consider Model 1, or Concept A, sorry, stick with my engineers here. Concept B, again, it's very common in tight places, especially in town. It's not as convenient necessarily for the owner, but it does allow for the cars to stack in the driveway without having to require them to be on the road. Again, it's in the best of possible worlds, the landscaping helps screen that from property to property, and it does allow the vehicles to be tucked further back from view, at least from the streetscape side. And we found that might be a good concept in certain instances. In that concept, I also saw that in the back, depending on the space and depending on how much of the yard you wanted to use, there would sometimes be a little bump for a parked car in the back, far back behind the house, which also seems to have been accommodating. And what I liked about this too, this very often is used for things like boats and other vehicle trailers, where they do get tucked behind the house but have access in and out on this sort of side driveway. One of the things we are looking at is not to require our driveways or to require them not to be impervious. I think what my short review showed was that very rarely do you see an asphalt or a cement driveway on the island. Typically you see surfaces like the ones shown here, even with a little grass in them, that are allowing the water to percolate, and it breaks up again that visual. In Concept C, this was it's not apparent. It's not totally apparent until I start describing it to you. Then it will jump out at you as to where this is. Mr. Voris asked that we look at a concept that actually brings the parking behind the homes with a little alleyway and Harbor View Way, the homes there where you've got that little street that runs behind them. That's actually a picture of that. And what the engineers were first concerned about, of course, is passage of traffic because it's too narrow. But what I discovered in going back there was that they've, with the blocks as the parking surface and having them spaced like that, you can actually kind of bob and weave your way through if necessary. It's also on our plan a one-way, so we wouldn't be having oncoming traffic coming through. And there's a couple of locations on our site map where this would work beautifully and actually allow the front of the homes to be without any kind of vehicle obstruction, and rather have the back of the home be the location for the cars and the parking. Concept D, again, is a slight takeoff maybe of A, but again, used efficiently and effectively. It's a shared driveway, but the sharing stops at the back so that the individual homeowners have their own designated spaces, again, tucked out of visual, allowing for the streetscape to remain slightly more pristine and not to encourage vehicle parking in the front of on the grass or in front of the house. Mm-hmm. So those are 4 concepts. We're not exactly saying that we're limiting things to this, but we're in keeping with Mr. Vors's charge that we mix up the map a bit. We think this is a good start for us to begin with the driveways, and then also to move then into a landscaping discussion. We have had conversations both internally and with Mr. Vors about making within our homeowners group mandated landscaping criteria, which we'll be working on. We also think that with the spacing of the homes and staggering of the homes, some of this will be a natural kind of flow, and that this at least with this intent and the establishment of the driveways, we'll be going far in that direction. Before I go too far on the landscaping, I will say that we did a lot of thinking. I did talk to Cormac today, actually. We did a lot of thinking about trees. I think that with this neighborhood, trees are going to be very important in terms of how it presents. And we were getting a lot of pushback on our honey locusts and even the pin oaks. I actually went out to Sherburne Commons and discovered that all those trees along the way have little plaques on the ground, which tells you what they are, which was very convenient, which who knew. But the one I liked the best was something called the London Plane, and apparently that seems to be very acceptable to a lot of folks. It's a very common street tree. I have some pictures of the one there, but it is, if you look down the row of trees by Sherman Commons, what's really interesting about that is they've all been planted obviously at the same time. They're all a different variety, but that's the one that's grown the largest and has a long trunk and is very stately, I think was the words I heard this morning from Mr. Cormac. Not to put words in your mouth, Cormac, but we like the London Plane. I went over to Arrowhead Nursery. We priced them out. They had a few there in terms of caliber. I had a great discussion there with them, and we're looking at maybe a 2 caliber tree, which would grow quickly. We also like the red maple, so we'd be putting those also around in the neighborhood, and we have a couple other selections. But I believe at the entrance right now, we're sort of thinking very seriously about the London Plane as our sort of flagship tree, if you will. And the other landscaping that we've discussed in some detail is on the corners. If you look at the site map, we'll be doing something on each of the corners that is a little distinctive, whether it be split rail fence, rocks, grasses, that kind of thing. So as far as the neighborhood is concerned, obviously the individual homeowners, we're going to try to dictate to some level of landscape. We're going to basically have, even if they own the lot and we're not developing it, they're going to have a requirement to go back to the board through your designee, which is probably going to be staff, to make sure that we don't have the same layouts, one house after the other. So whether that be for driveways, for home placements, or for landscaping. And then as far as the neighborhood as a whole is concerned, we will be looking at doing beautification with respect to trees as well as corners and things of that nature, so that it will be integrated and consistent with other parts of the development. I think that's all. Did I miss anything? Okay, questions?
Yeah, all right. Board members, do you have any questions at this point?
I'm fine with the parking layouts.
No, I think concept C, I'm just questioning, is that similar to Beach Plum over off of Fairgrounds where they have, are you reducing the, maybe the cuts, but also the shell driveway in the back that they have access to? Is that
Right, and a
kind
lot
the
of these are basic. I mean, again, we're not restricting ourselves to these, but we're saying that these are kind of a jumping off point at which people can create other configurations that are slightly different. I mean, the goal here is not to actually dictate anything, but to say the only thing we want to dictate is not to have them all the same. I mean, and I think that's going to be really key. Not to criticize anything, that's not our own, but I do think we've had some feedback from other developments, namely Sacham's Path, where the parking, with the cement slab in front of each of the homes really isn't probably the best option. And so we're trying to kind of use that as a way of jumping off into maybe new directions and obviously learning from things in terms of how they present. I will say, too, that here we did also include in our supplement one of the other things that we heard loud and clear from Mr. Vorse was that this homeowners association and the road maintenance needed to be spelled out. I mean, obviously these are going to be private roads for a while, and that would include things like sidewalks, lighting, maintenance, plantings, things of that nature. And we are working through with him what that means for not only our private spaces internal, but also to the public spaces on Old South Road, at least to get things established and started. So all of that is, at least for the internal agreement, is spelled out specifically in this supplemental condition. And we thought both of these were critical enough to actually bring in front of you tonight, because from Mr. Vorse's conversation with us, these were high priorities as far as the staff was concerned. And rather than just tell you we were going to do it, we actually worked out the language so that you had a chance to take a look at that. So again, the new pictures that we're showing you are mostly to conform with the direction that we were sort of given and the language that we presented for the single-family homes.
And I guess aside from that comment with the concept C, which I like, and incorporating into the plan, one of the other, in the language that I remember reading for maintenance and the roadways and things like that, one thing caught my eye was the maintenance of the playgrounds. And though I'm all in favor of the playgrounds being added into for open space, I'm not quite so sure how the town feels about being required to maintain those playgrounds.
And if you don't mind, I'm sort of thinking of single-family homes and then the multifamily homes, and the playgrounds are really part of the multifamily, except for the entrance. But yes, I think I was saying to Dave, one of the things that we have that in our favor, and this is kind of an aside note, but you should be aware of, is that the Guwacki property to date, a lot of it has been sustained by wells. There's a tremendous number of wells, and we're looking into connecting the irrigation at least back to the wells and then installing town water for the residences. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and so for some of these public spaces, we would also obviously include them there, because irrigation is going to be your highest cost. There's no doubt about it. And there's a tremendous amount of well water in that location, and we would be foolish if we ignored that going into this phase of it. So we're talking with the engineers right now about that, but that should give you some more confidence even that when we look at irrigation, I think we're going to do our best to actually make use of the wells that are existing there on the property. I just thought of something and then totally spaced on it. But it'll come back to me, I'm sure. At any rate, I think that's.
Those are my only two things.
Oh, I know. I was going to add, and I know this is redundant for Linda, but having gone through the HCC process, a lot of the landscaping, of course, will be the hardscaping will be part of that process. So there's going to be another check on us with respect to that. So even though we've put this in place in detail, we want you to remember that the HCC will also have a review on this. And so we're going to be actually reviewing twice our site hardscapes, both at the HCC level and with you through the planning staff. So I think that's important to remember as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What I'd like to see is one list of conditions. I know the apartments are different. They're going to have a whole other set of things. But I'd like to see a draft of a homeowners association. I'd like to see at least one tree per lot. 2 caliper is never going to fly with me. I've dealt with this before at the ZBA, and the minimum caliper is a 4 caliper. We have never approved a 2 caliper tree that I've approved. So that to me is right there. I know Andrew had a little list of red maples and a couple of elms or something else. The red maples are really good. They're hardy. You can't kill them. So just a little bit more fleshed out on that.
We're committed to doing a tree every 50 feet, and Dave can talk a little bit. He did a pencil sketch. 4 caliber is, frankly, way too large for that kind of spacing. It's not only prohibitively expensive, and obviously we're trying to drive home cost here as an issue, but just the mere planting of a tree of that size would require a lot more mobilization than is typical. And the idea would be that on a 4, I mean, they don't even carry them at Arrowhead, to be honest. I mean, the highest they got was 2.5, 3. And I went over there and I looked at their stock and what they had there, and I'm telling you that a 4 caliber, I don't know where else you've planted it, but I would be surprised to see it, frankly, in any other subdivision.
Well, that's what they've done at the ZBA, but those are obviously smaller situations than this.
I've been looking at all the, Mr. Kushulik's new subdivision, a lot of the ones that are brand new, frankly, $1 million homes. I don't see a 4 caliber tree, and I think it would be really a disservice to these folks to actually put that requirement. We are open, as we said, to a tree every 50 feet, which brings us up to what, 300 and almost 400 trees, 390 trees.
Is that one every lot minimum?
Yeah, I believe it is. And
on the roadside, not on the yard side.
Yes, where again, we saw what happened in Noshop when things didn't get planted correctly.
Yeah.
We're fully aware with these conversations that we're having with staff of what that danger is. And we are looking at other neighborhoods to see what worked and what didn't work, and what has been done and what hasn't been done. And we see, from my review at least, that 2.5 caliber, maybe 2 is not what you want to be, but 2.5 caliber is perfectly acceptable and used all the time in $1 million spec houses. And if that's their bar, I'm afraid I'm not going to be happy about going above it. So, as far as the conditions are concerned, Dave, did you want to speak to the?
I don't want to go into them now. I just want to see your proposed list of conditions for the housing as versus the apartment buildings, which has a different list of conditions. Because that's the only way I'm going to vote on a special permit at all, ever, is if I see one list I can look at, see if there's anything missing, see what you're proposing for a homeowners association basic, and some of this stuff codified into a list. I'm just tired of getting 6 different things on one email, and then I got another email with one other thing or 2 other things, and I'm getting sick of it. I just want it all in one thing. I'm tired of getting stuff the night before, the morning of, 2 days, even 36 hours ago at this point. I'm tired of that. I mean, we're all busy. A lot of us have other things to do. And when I have to go back, and I have, just like now, I've got probably 3 different things open. You just gave me a hard copy, which is good. But I need it in one place, at one time, and a list of conditions so I can actually start looking at the permits, the actual permits.
Right. And, excuse me, but I'm sure that Mr. Arminetti is going to show you that 2.5 weeks ago we gave you just that list in the special permit, the way that it was required of us to present to you in this format. So we can go through those conditions, Linda, but you've had them for a good long time. Nothing except the...
I have to go through all my emails to find them again? I'm not doing that. I just did go through everything Catherine sent me, and I don't have those. I go back to something more recent. I don't have anything in here from 2.5 weeks ago because it ties up the computer.
It's the same one we had
Last week?
It's the same one we had last week.
I have those last week, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and
It's
But
the
I
same-
just don't have a real full list of bullet. Here are all the conditions and anything else you've added here, which are these two
To be
paragraphs.
fair, this is how we were asked to present it. So, we've been at this for a good long time, and to keep changing the rules is not okay.
Patty, I'm not asking you to change the rules. I'm getting kind of testy with this whole thing.
through the chair.
I'm not asking you.
And I know.
Let me finish, please. I'm not asking you to change the rules. I just want one list with all the conditions on it so I can sit there and think about the conditions without wading through however many of those special permits we had last week, 25 pages apiece. I don't want to do that. I just want you to give me a list, just condense it into one bullet pointed list so I can see what the conditions are and whether I feel it's enough. That's all I want. All the other verbiage that went along with those things last week, because we changed some stuff because of the subdivision, is fine. But I just want a list of conditions. I got the waiver issue, that's fine.
But Melinda, we've been at this since June, okay? And this is
Patty.
the first time we've
Just let her
heard
finish,
that you need a
please.
bulleted list of conditions.
The other
Number
problem
one,
is, Patty,
Can you,
they're
all
here.
right, do me a favor, if you guys,
I have
thank
a
you.
major
Just hold
problem
on for a
with
second.
that comment. Really.
Do me a favor. She's given you the courtesy to speak, and I've been doing that too. So I would really appreciate that works both ways. So yield the floor to her, please. I didn't appreciate you being cut off. I'm trying to.
Oh, I didn't cut off though, did I?
No,
No,
you did,
okay.
no. You got cut off.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to say it's really got to be a little balanced. Here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I would make the case, and strongly make the case, that we've been at this a good long time, that the conditions exist in this document. These conditions have been written in this format at the request of the board. The materials that we sent out on Tuesday evening are not 24 hours ago or something else different than that. We're in a position now where we're looking for this. We're looking for guidance. We've had a week and have not heard anything from anybody about comments except for our work with the staff. And it's getting to be a little bit difficult to be confronted with this kind of pushback. I'm sorry. I mean, anything you'd like to say, we'd be happy to talk about. We certainly have accommodated, in many respects, to a very large extent. And if you don't mind, I think that Dave can walk you through the conditions that have been in front of you, and that might make things clearer.
I want to finish with that thought. We got them last week. Saying that you've gone through this since, and that was another problem with one of these things, saying that you went through this since June is completely misrepresented. It was continued, whether your guys couldn't get here, or you weren't ready, or the plan wasn't ready, or we got the plan too late, or whatever. We have not been digesting those decisions until last week, and we are primarily looking at the subdivision so you can get your subdivision plans out of here. We did not look at those things last week as a special permit at that time. So don't tell me we've been looking at this since June. A super majority of all those things, every time it comes up on an agenda, has been either you pulled it or something else happened, and that is not correct. So this is really the first couple of times that we've actually sat down to take a look at the special permit aspect of this. We've been looking at the overall plan for a while. But this is the second time we've talked about these, and we have not talked about them as a special permit separate from the subdivision until now. So don't say that again, and that's coming out of any decision I sign. But we also brought up a bunch of questions that I had last week about, and then was told it was going in the special permit, because it wasn't. So I have a whole bunch of stuff that's not there. So this is now we're sitting down to digest it. And I will take that time to read them again, because I read all of them last week. Everything I got last week, for hours. So it's not like I'm not familiar with what you have. But I also had other stuff that's not in there. And to get back to the site plan, I agree, switch up the parking as wherever you want, however you think that's going to fit in there. As far as the park, which I have on another email, which I think I have open, I'm not satisfied at all. It has not addressed the concern I have been expressing for some time now. There's a lot of foo-foo stuff going on. You got little walkways going on. There is no open space that's not attached to some apartment building, put it that way. And there certainly isn't an open space where anybody can run around and throw a football or throw a baseball or just simply throw a frisbee or just sit out there, other than the areas that are connecting the apartment buildings and whatnot. And this little thing that I saw that was in one of these attachments that I assume is on towards the Clay Street side is not acceptable to me at all and not what the intent was. So I'm having a little problem with the little pocket parks, which is not what I'm after. I've been in these other things, and they're all playing in the street. And they have just as much yard in some cases as what you're showing. It's not working. I want some open space. For 700 bedrooms, there's going to be an awful lot of kids in there, more than likely. Where are they going? Into the street. So I'm not happy with the way it's laid out so far. Now, whether that can be addressed when we do the landscaping plan, when we do the subdivision sign-off at the end, and maybe because you'll have a better idea of where the buildings are and what shape the buildings are in, maybe I have to wait for that, but right now I am not happy. And I've been on this from the very beginning. So that's all I'm going to say today.
Well, I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, if I could, for the record, what's not the case is that these things have been delayed by Richmond. I think if we go through the minutes, we'll see that that's absolutely true. I don't want to go back and forth. I want these plans to go forward. So I'm not going to go through the rest, except for maybe the parks and the discussion of the parks, and then Dave can talk about the conditions. The areas that we've designated are areas specific to pocket parks and places to sit. You're absolutely right as far as large fields where people can throw balls. Those will become as we situate the buildings. The Clay Street location is a location that we've identified as a large space that we can use either with landscaping or keep open. But it's a large space that is being, it's being set aside obviously for the road for it ever to go through. So we have that as a long-term goal, whatever way you want it to look like, or as a group. But we like these little pocket parks. They're not intended to be the place where you go throw a football, but I think they're very nice places for people to sit, to read a book, to gather together, and that kind of thing. The one at the entrance is an entrance. It's not a park. It's really the entrance to the whole development. So we hope you look at it that way. It's not really intended to go throw a football. It's right in the middle of traffic. So it's really a place to go and to sit. We took out the tables. It's got a little bit of a playground, swings and that kind of thing there, but it's not in a location that would be conducive at all to a larger space. It's just meant for the entrance. And why don't I let Dave go through some of the conditions?
Not really. No, that's not Clay Street.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, just let me,
Okay.
do you mind if I go to Mr. Arminetti for a second?
Where are you?
No, I'd like to skip him for a minute.
All right. Do you?
It's just a quick,
Oh, certainly. It's your meeting.
it might be helpful. I was wondering where staff thinks we are with the decisions. What's your comfort level?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to talk about the specific special permits, because talking about all three of them together is just really not productive here. I think we need to focus. I think we're closest on the Sandpiper Place 1 and 2. Those,
Why
I
don't
think,
we suggest Mr. Arminetti would start with
yeah, I would suggest
the one closest.
we focus on Sandpiper Place 1 and talk about those specifically.
Okay.
I think we may have, since the parks and the final, I guess, layout of the apartment buildings, I think might be a little bit of a more detailed discussion, that may have to go to the 9th. But I think that we should focus on
The when? The when?
The ninth.
The 9th,
9th of what?
February.
our other special meeting that we had
I
agreed
didn't know
to.
we'd actually formally set it up.
We've reserved the room so we can do that, starting at 4. So I think that we're closest. We've had, as Patty had talked about, there's been a lot of thought on the single families. We have some additional thoughts on that I think that's closest to a standard subdivision, and I think we can get those conditions hammered out.
We're not
Tonight.
going to
Yeah.
be forced
Yes.
to make
So-
a decision tonight.
Well, that's, okay.
Well, we do vote,
And-
we
and
vote
we-
on it, right? I mean, how many votes do we need to,
There's,
For the
well,
special
let me,
permit.
I've heard what you've said loud and
Four?
clear. You've said it a few times,
I'm
but
not
that
ready
doesn't,
today.
that doesn't echo necessarily the sentiments of the board, and this is why we're going through
Well, then
one
I'm
by
gonna
one.
have to go back through the list that I had last week that you told me to wait.
Who told you?
I asked last week when I went down and asked the questions, some of them were related to
You
the
were-
subdivision, and then I said, are these related to the subdivision or the special permit? They said, bring it up with the special permit, which I didn't do, because I didn't think we were pushing ourselves, being forced into making a decision today. I could probably be ready by next week, but certainly not today.
It's, again, it's every
not
member
doing
of
your
this
due
board.
diligence at all.
It's every member of this board has an opportunity to be heard.
Well, I didn't finish, I
All
didn't
right,
add all this
so-
stuff, and I wasn't planning on doing that today.
Yeah, I think, Andrew,
You've got
can I
three.
ask you a question? Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Would it be productive for you to hear from us first and just kind of get a sense of where everything's going? Or would you be more comfortable in terms of trying to?
No, if there's a list, we should go through and hear what those, if those are conditions, then we should, some of it
I'm trying to
is
find
handled through the normal, so the subdivision that you've already approved,
Right.
there's a homeowners association already formed under that. Those are standard, those are already taken care of. So these are the details that are above and beyond that you all need to talk about.
Okay.
I think what we've already heard and when the process that we want to follow is similar to, it's not as tightly done as the 40B process for Beach Plum Village. In that plan, they've pre-spec'd out which house design will be on every single lot. But this isn't the same. There's going to be different builders, there's going to be, so it doesn't need to be that tight. But I think doing that review and coming up with the templates for the driveway is going to help and provide an extra level of review. There's some general guidelines that we would include that, and I think we still have to talk a little bit. The single families, I think we're pretty clear on. I think we have to talk about the multifamilies, how many of those will be, what the count will be. There's, typically, for example, on corner lots, we try to put driveways on the side streets. Because we're going to have on-street parking, I think, we have to have a little bit of a discussion on that, which side it's going on. So there's some things that, but again, I'd like to, the mixing and matching the two is just not productive
Right.
here. So I'd like to focus on one or the other, and I'd like to focus on one and go through that and, again, hear what the board's concerns are, but
Okay.
that's where we need to go.
All right. So would you like Mr. Arminetti to do that, or do you want to do that, sir?
I think if Mr. Arminetti has things to add on Sandpiper Place 1, that's what we should hear about.
Okay.
Well, I think these were split into Sandpiper Place 1 South, and I have two of them here. I have a south and I have
And a north.
a north.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on south right now.
So, kind of what Andrew has asked at this point, just identify which one of the two that we're going to be dealing with, south and north. And I know there seems to be a great deal of similarity between the two, but just so we're all really clear, but please.
There is, through you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we want to focus on, there's Sandpiper 1, which is south, and Sandpiper 2, which is north. There's only 1-1 and 1-2.
Right.
There's only one north and one south. It might be a little confusing, we acknowledge, but we're on Sandpiper 1 South, which is what people know as across from the Cedar Crest 1 subdivision off of Evergreen, the left-hand side, if you're looking at the plan. If you have a second to put up the plan, or maybe the phasing plan, Holly, might be easiest, or the master plan. Closest to Surfside, that half of the subdivision. Furthest from Old South Road, closest to Surfside. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, both of the Sandpiper conditions for the special permits and the documents are quite similar. I'm starting on page 10 of the draft of the conditions for Sandpiper 1, formatted as per your standard special permit decision as was requested by the staff and by the board, as Patty mentioned.
What's the heading on where you're starting?
So the heading on the conditions start in category A, which is the density and affordability conditions. So we're talking about don't have my laser pointer this week. I think I left it behind last week.
Ours is actually starting on page 9 where it says density configuration.
Being held
presentation
hostage.
Conditions.
Correct. 5316, if you go to page 10 at the bottom, that's where the condition should start. There's a little preamble about the decision that's in your standard format, and then it starts with category A.
I don't
Keep
have
scrolling,
it.
you're
The
getting
ones you
there.
sent me separately.
Keep going.
The stuff from last week.
No, this pagination must be slightly different. That's still the findings.
Yeah.
So just the boring legal stuff that nobody wants to read. There you go. So it starts at category A, density and affordability conditions. A lot of this, Mr. Chairman and Board, is descriptory so that there's enough specificity in here that if you were to pick this up independently and read it, you would get all the details. So the first couple of conditions just specify how many lots there are and gets into a fair amount of detail about the affordability requirement per the zoning and per our memorandum of agreement with the Board of Selectmen. How many units, what the AMI is. It clarifies that the remaining units that are not AMI restricted are market rate units and are not restricted in any way. Fairly straightforward stuff. There is a limit in there, subject to our further discretion, of 4 bedrooms per home. We discussed that a little bit last week. That's kind of our own internal governor to make sure that we don't use too many of our 700 total bedroom allowance up front, and that we don't allow people to build too many big homes in the first half of the development, and then we end up shortchanging ourselves in the end. So it's kind of a control over that. And those are the first 3. So those really are descriptory more than anything. I guess the only numerical condition in there is our own internal limit of trying to limit these to no more than 4 bedrooms per home. So those are the first 3, and those are similar for the other Sandpiper, except that one has 52 units instead of 42. The language is exactly the same. The next category, let me take a quick step back. We would propose that the supplemental condition lot configuration review would go in this category. And I think that condition is probably the most important, probably, at the end of the day for the whole permit, and we appreciate the staff working with us in the last week on that. It really kind of ties the whole permit together, we think, and gives the board great control, but also discretion. And the way I would see it happening is you're going to have the review of 94 different lots here and lot configurations and homes. So what this does is it essentially mimics the site plan review process and puts that as a level of review that would continue in the future for all of these different lots, whether we develop them or individuals buy lots from us and develop them. It will be subject to the affordable and the market rate units. And what this does is it gives the board control to continue to review every single one of those lots, if you so desire, right down to the slightest detail. Or if you start to review a few and you set the pattern and the protocol, you then have the ability to delegate all that to the staff. So it gives you 2 opportunities to move forward. Either you keep direct control, or if you don't want to see 94 different applications after the first couple come into you and you're comfortable with the pattern that you've set, the staff can take that over, and that's built into this condition. So I think it works really well, and it'll give certainty and a process to our buyers, both in terms of lots and houses, and I think it'll work really well because it'll give you all the continued control and level of confidence that you're going to be able to continue to create and sustain the image of this community, no matter who buys the lots and no matter who builds it, and as I think Mr. Vorst said, no matter which contractor is involved. So I think it really is probably the key condition in the whole thing at this point. Otherwise, the B category, rolling over into the next page, specifies the infrastructure. This somewhat mimics the subdivision conditions, which is really where more of the infrastructure is included. It talks about the driveway design a little bit, so maybe condition 2 will be modified a little to more reflect the lot configuration review condition. It's kind of repetitive in this sense. The rest flows into the traffic mitigation, which simply refers back to the larger condition that's in the subdivisions that talks about what traffic mitigation has to be done and what timing that traffic mitigation has to be done. Same thing with the phasing. This is pretty much wrapped into the subdivision conditions, going down into category D, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This talks about the affordability a little bit, in that we obviously have to deliver one affordable unit for every 3 market rate units, and it confirms that. It confirms the buffer areas that are applicable under the zoning to the residential properties around us, and that's all of D. E, general and regulatory and miscellaneous conditions, again, provides some supplementary documentation and conditions about the affordability, refers back to the fact that we need to get regulatory agreements with the Board of Selectmen and with the state to implement all this. So it's kind of belt and suspender stuff. It really doesn't even fall into planning, other than the fact that if you didn't have this in the special permit, in essence, we would only have to rely on our memorandum of agreement with the Board of Selectmen. And so there really does need to be binding conditions in here that relates to the affordability, even though they essentially just mimic what's in the memorandum of agreement with the Board of Selectmen. And then there's a couple of additional conditions in here, one of which, if you scroll down to condition 6, discusses the conversation and negotiations we're still having with the Cedar Crest 3 Homeowners Association about potentially self-restricting some multi-unit development on any of the lots in terms of accessory, secondary, tertiary dwellings, and duplex dwellings. But again, the lot configuration review would allow the board and or the staff discretion in that regard too. And one of the things we've talked about with the staff at some length is none of us wants the neighborhood to become over-densified, or particularly any areas within the neighborhood to become over-densified internally. And one of the suggestions was perhaps there could be a condition that limits duplex or secondary or tertiary dwellings to occurring on no more than 2 or 3 contiguous lots. And we think that's appropriate and something that could really work well. In a way, the neighborhood's almost going to self-regulate itself in that regard, in that of the 25% affordable lots and homes that we're going to build, those are going to have to be restricted by statute to single dwellings only. Otherwise, they won't be eligible for the shy list. So 1 out of every 4 lots is going to be self-restricted to single dwelling anyway. So it's the remaining 3 out of 4 that you would want to look at in terms of some additional restriction. And I'm confident, remain confident, that we're going to get a final agreement with the Cedar Crest 3 neighbors. So I think there's going to be some of that built into that agreement. But the lot configuration review that's proposed in this condition, I think, would really work well as a control over that. And it'll allow design, review, but it will also allow the board and the staff to say there are already 2 or 3 multiple dwellings on that street. We don't want to allow a 4th one. And we're fine with that. We have the same interests at heart that the board and the community has, which is for this to be a neighborhood that has diversity in terms of density, design, and we don't want it to be overly dense as well. There's a huge housing need here and demand that we're going to meet with this project, but we don't want to go overboard. So that gets into the couple of conditions there. Condition about working with NERDA to come up with specific routes and stops. We've talked about that before. And then the last couple are just administrative conditions. So we acknowledge it's a lot of paper. There are a fair amount of conditions here. I think there's 22 in this decision. And if we add 2 more, that'll make it 24. But a lot of it is fairly straightforward. It does mimic either the subdivision approvals, or it just reinforces or codifies specifically stuff that we've already all agreed to and that the board's aware of. This is going to be a 25% affordable community. Some of them are going to be 80% AMI. Some of them are going to be 175% AMI. So just wouldn't get too caught up in the daunting nature of the paperwork. There's really half a dozen or 8 or 10 concepts that are in here that are really the meat of the permit. So hopefully that helps.
Andrew, is there anything you want to add to that? Because I know you've worked closely with them, and then I'll turn it back to our board.
There are some things I want to discuss, that, especially the things that are, there are some things that are separate. So for the overall concept, I think that we probably, one of the parking arrangements that we talked about is the parking in front of the building, and that's more likely to occur with a duplex type building. I didn't see that in your templates. Are you, I mean, the templates, I think we do need to stick to the templates. So if that's going to be proposed, and it might be okay to do those, just not row after row of those. Mm-hmm. So I think we do want the templates agreed to, and the variation to the templates is something that either has to come back to the board or needs further discussion. So I think we've got to come up with, generally in this, we would say certain X number of units, X number of duplexes will be allowed. I think we need to get some numbers on that. We've done that in all subdivisions, really. And I think there should be some basic rules about that no more than, 2 duplexes are located side by side. We've already had the history of rows of duplexes that are all the same that don't turn out well. So,
Parking's a nightmare.
especially with all parking front-loaded in the front. We've made specific changes to the bylaw to get rid of that. So I think we should establish some minimum front yard setbacks generally, but again, a template could allow for them to vary somewhat. But I think that needs to be part of what we actually agree to in this. And then I think, of course, it should be open to other ideas. But those will have to be dealt with as they come up. I think, in certain, again, if we're talking about Sandpiper 1, the lots that front, you mentioned Cedar Crest 3, but there's Cedar Crest 1 too. So the lots that are on Cedar Crest 1 are essentially 20 through 26 on your, are they going to be subject to is the idea to subject them to the same type of rule, or are those going to be, generally they front into a subdivision of all single families. So would those tend to be single families with garage apartments or with an accessory apartment, or I would think those would not be duplexes.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we talked about that a little bit last week in the subdivision context. You're talking about the 7 lots that would front directly on Evergreen, Mr. Boris, I take it?
Yep.
I think the numbers you stated are correct. You'd be talking, Holly, if you could, about the left hand or the south side where the lots are on Evergreen. Might be easier if you put up the color master plan or the phasing plan with the numbers on it. Maybe blow it up a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, please. So we're talking about the lower left hand, the slightly darker green, more of the darker olive green where those D lots are, along Evergreen exactly. What we had talked about and what's already in the subdivision condition from last week is those cannot be further subdivided. So that's made clear in the subdivision permit. What we had contemplated with the Cedar Crest homeowners was to restrict these to duplexes absolutely prohibited on all of them, as you just mentioned. I do think, given the size of the lots and the character of the neighborhood, that accessory and secondary should be permitted, perhaps subject to special permit, but should be permitted and not wholly prohibited. That would be our thought on that.
Are you saying primary, secondary, and tertiary? Or just primary and secondary?
I don't know that we have a preference on tertiary. I think we'd probably just leave that to the board. I think accessory and secondary is appropriate, maybe subject to special permit. Tertiary, I don't think we have a real strong opinion on either way.
I just wanted to add that Richmond has no intention of developing duplexes anywhere on the property. So the only time they may come up is if someone purchases a lot. So again, as you consider what number you're talking about, it's not on our slate to actually do any of that. We're going to focus strictly on single-family homes.
Are you building them all?
No, we're selling lots too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure what that
Right.
Andrew, did you want to pick up from where you left off?
Yes, so as far as lot 96, so for the connector, and this is something that I think came up before, so that will just be essentially grassed. Is that going to have a path? What are we talking about for that? For now.
I have that on my list.
I had an idea.
Through
That it be reserved for potential pathway sometime in the future at the will of the town or something. Because it can't really be used now as long as the people to the south want to not allow it. It's going to end up in court and be a mess. So there's some way we could reserve it, but not really, you know what I mean? Not really have it ready to go, but not give it up.
Right.
No, it's a
But-
separate lot anyway.
Hmm?
It's a separate lot. It's a road lot.
Yeah, I know, but what the use is gonna be for, I think,
We always had a path going through there.
yeah, no,
It was
I
just
want,
walking
I want the path to be there. I would want it to be connected. But I'm just saying, I'd like to think of some language that pushes it down the road
I understand what
until
you're saying.
those roads get taken by the town. Because otherwise, it can't get open unless you get permission from them.
Isn't that
Oh.
in the subdivision plan?
Andrew?
Yeah,
That's
it's-
just an idea, and, you know,
Yeah,
I just thought it might save some,
I know the fire department had raised a question whether this would be available. Holly, didn't they ask about whether this would be available for emergency access?
Breakaway fence?
So,
They're all coming up with it now.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we'd be supportive of that concept. Essentially, I think that's how it's drafted in some way. It may not be as detailed as that, but
right,
that concept we're fine with.
okay.
Because it'd be basically the same thing in both, except the one is restricted completely.
So I think that, so there's the main road that goes through, and basically from lots 47 to 58. So that's the side of the road that that the on-street parking would be. That's the best side for that. So lots on the other side, so 39, 40, 44, 45, 18 should have their driveways come off the side roads. So they would be restricted to have access.
Yep.
Okay, and again, that's sort of a standard condition. Somewhere in, I think at least two of those, there should be shared driveway in at least two sets of lots in 47 through 58. If it's possible to allow 47 to access through the parking lot design on the other, on the apartment, that would be better.
Doesn't look like it.
And again, if the opportunity to do parking sort of behind, I think would exist for that group of lots. That may be something we have to look at when we talk about what happens on the apartment side.
Go ahead.
I did have that conversation with our engineers at some length, and we were trying to grapple with that, and it will require us to sort of do some reconfiguration of the apartments to do that, so that there's enough space. Currently, there's not enough space to have a car pass another. But if we, if we did some reconfiguration, it definitely would be possible. So.
Even the one way is fine.
Yeah,
You
the
know.
part of the problem is there's a long stretch, so they were a little hesitant on.
I wouldn't recommend it for the whole thing.
Okay.
I mean, again, I think the way the apartment buildings are drawn, and I think this may be somewhat of Linda's concern, is that they're kind of equa-spaced through the whole thing.
Right.
And I think there's opportunities in that to maybe tighten up the spacing between the apartment buildings,
Right.
which would give you maybe some more open space, which is addressing,
A lot more open space.
or a bigger area that's not the size of a full field, but might at least create, some larger areas that, I think the problem with some of those, I don't want to get off this topic too much, but it's like an equal spacing throughout, which is like sprawled through the whole thing, where if you could tighten that up a little bit, it might create some more usable spaces. So,
Like
Any-
little, like clusters, like Peter Cooper had their cluster zone, and then there's open space, and there's more cluster zone, and then open space.
We're completely amenable to it. The idea would be that, we take excuse at the fact that we haven't seen this on the island before, so we sort of
right.
laid it out in a certain way,
Yeah.
and as we're going through it, I think we're making more and more sense out of it, and so
Good.
it's not as though we're pushing back, so.
Because when they do get clustered, it also, their building envelopes tend to blend into each other.
Right.
Right now, it's like a solid wall when you really look at it, of structure, structure, structure. So when they
Well-
do this, there's a little bit more open space, and they're all sort of, you look at one and you don't see the other one because they're clustered.
Well, you'll especially appreciate this. Part of the reason was because with the former design, as you know, the ones in Meadows 1, we were looking to break it up with landscaping. And now we're moving towards a different design product that we can add a lot more detail on the buildings, and so it adds a lot more energy to be able to cluster them around. But that was the driver. Is the old model really would have forced us to put some trees in between, and I think you would have preferred that.
Yep. Andrew, did you want to pick up from there?
I did have a question. Lots 2021, are they going to have access via the back little street or not?
We weren't intending that. If there's a rationale that would be positive that the board or the staff thinks, we could talk about that, or we weren't intending it though.
I would think not,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, through you, because, again, these lots are going to be paying into the other homeowners association, right? So,
They're related to the other guys.
so 20 through 26 essentially are going to be paying into Cedar Crest 1, is that
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So I would say that those should not have access, vehicular access. I don't think there's a problem with, pedestrian access. I think the tree number we've talked about. Linda, did you have other things on trees?
On the tree issue, I was looking at last week's thing that we got, and you yourselves said 3-inch caliper in your previous permit. Not that, one we just changed. I haven't looked through that one to find that. But it said 3-inch caliper, which is fine. But the types of trees, the ones in Sherburne Commons, I've seen them because I live right next door to it during the summer, and there's not a heck of a lot going on there. They're not shade trees. They're just sort of, and they haven't grown very fast. They're just sort of there.
I would agree, and that's why I looked at them. They're all different, and we'd rather keep them uniform. I know there's some scientific logic to mixing a little more in because of disease, but I agree with you. The one that did grow the best, and interestingly, Cormac was 100% behind it, was the London Plain.
Is that the one that's closest to the entrance?
It's one of the closest ones to the
Yeah.
entrance. It's a nice.
That's the only one that really does much.
Right, and the Arrowhead Nursery folks were very much recommending that to me as well, so I ran over there to see it.
But the red maples, I mean, just sort of.
I like the red
very
maples.
some-
It's red maple, then
what's the other one? Andrew,
London
you were
Plain.
talking about?
But the locust, the honey locust, they were absolutely right. They're scrawly and short, and
Yeah, and the pear trees don't work because they're like this.
Barley
Right.
pear too.
So they don't work very well either. You just want something that's going to do like if you go up to Woodbury.
right.
You want something that's going to go, and elms that are disease-free. There's all kinds of stuff that'll
We're
blossom out that also have a very high trunk, because the whole point is you don't want a tree that has low branches. You want something that has a high trunk.
It's exactly what we were going at as I walked down with these little plaques and made notes as to which ones looked which way. So, yeah, that's going to be the look, and we'll be pretty consistent with that throughout the. In fact, I'm going to go back to HTC and change Meadows 1 to all those kind of trees as well. So,
I'm not sure they
So-
do.
On the trees, I'm fine with no less than 2-inch. The jump to 3 inches is big.
No, they proposed 3-inch in their decision last week.
Well, they changed their mind when they got some
Are you willing to
prices.
stay with the 3-inch you gave us?
2.5, I think.
I don't ever remember, sorry, through you,
I
Mr.
just
Chairman.
got it.
please.
I don't think we ever proposed any caliper. There was a slight discussion about it. Mr. Markland is exactly correct. The price when you bump up to 3.5 is a 50% increase. So when you're talking about almost 400 trees,
Yeah.
and again, I know the board's heard this a little bit, beating a horse, but in addition to the affordable units by statute, we're trying to keep the market rate workforce units, both for sale and rental, as reasonable as possible. So another couple $100,000 on trees makes a big difference.
It does.
And I think we've all been at this long enough. If you pick the right trees and you take care of them, 2.5s become 3.5 real quick. And I think we're totally comfortable with that. But that upfront expense, and as Patty mentioned, the root ball is much larger. It's much more difficult to install. There's a lot of complications. It sounds easy enough. It's only 1 more inch of caliper, but there's a lot of ramifications to that.
I have a couple more questions.
Let me just
Done.
tidy up with him first, and then we'll get on to you. Go ahead, Andrew, is there anything else? Because I feel like as he's going through it, he's covering a lot of what you were going to bring up.
No, I mean, I think we've already discussed a water sewer easement that needs to go over Lot 96 and include that roadway. And I think we've discussed, it's already included in the subdivision about which roads would become public. I think that's pretty much set. Lighting, did we talk about lighting?
No.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we didn't get too specific about it. It's included in that catch-all condition that we will work it out prior to final plans in consultation with the staff and the board. So I think there's a control there that once we get a little more down the road towards final plans, we can come back with specific examples, and the board and the staff can pick exactly what you want.
We also have approved plans by both the HCC and this board for lighting at Meadows 1 and the retail space, and they're identical, so it wouldn't be a big surprise for us to be integrating this back in here. And we would be doing a lighting plan with a lighting engineer, as we did with both of those renditions, and they would basically tell us the spacing depending on the pole size. So the only question we're going to have with HCC is how high we can make the poles. And that's going to be the decision that will determine the lighting plan, because the size of the pole will, basically require us to have more or less, depending.
Oh, no.
Did you?
Well, yeah, I'm wondering, are we close to the written part of the decision, Andrew? Do we need all these things that we're talking about integrated in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if that's so, and our meeting's the 9th, I mean, you almost can't. When would you need it, Linda? I mean,
Well,
Just by Tuesday, it's fine with me.
okay.
but
Just saying, so we can.
So Andrew can get his
Yep.
stuff in it.
right.
No, I understand. I'm just saying. Maybe we can wrap one of these up.
So Andrew, go ahead.
All right, so of the 40, of the 46, so in Sandpiper 1, 46 lots, right?
42 buildable lots.
42. And 1, 2, so 7 are are going to be,
Evergreen, no duplex,
so single family plus possible accessory.
Just a
And
secondary
secondary.
dwelling. Primary and a secondary dwelling.
Okay. And then of the remaining ones, so we've got 35, and so the affordable count in this is,
11. So there's 11 that are already going to be restricted solely to single dwelling.
These are
Right
all
off the top.
homeownership, right?
All home ownership,
They're all
correct.
homeownership.
so of the 24 that are left, I think we should talk about how many of those would be allowed to be duplex. Do you have any idea on that?
We didn't want to do any duplex.
But the point is, they're selling lots to
Oh,
people,
true. Other people.
Right.
and they need to know.
I guess on an early market, we've only gotten maybe 1 or 2 inquiries out of a couple hundred people that are interested. I mean, I do think that most folks are looking to, on a lot this size, have their own home. So, and again, I think that closer to the entrance would be the place to put them, farther from the neighborhood that's not with duplexes in
So
Cedar
George
Crest.
South Road end?
Right. I mean, just my thinking in terms
Yeah.
of just dealing with this. But, out of the 24,
6, that's
that would be a lot.
25%.
That's a lot.
6 out of 40-something lots?
I don't like to see a lot of duplexes in here because of how small these lots are.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think the idea was that if there were 6 that were allowed, and the standard is that there's no duplexes allowed next to each other, no duplexes allowed across the street, that they would be interspersed throughout. And again, if there's no demand for duplexes, then they won't be built. But
Well,
Hang on, let me go to David and I'll come right back.
and that's
to you.
25% of 24.
Yeah.
So it's still only going to be 4 bedrooms on that duplex lot.
okay.
It's the same amount,
Right.
it's just in one building.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Okay.
Duplexes
Mr.
tend to
Chairman?
be big boxes that look like crap.
There's a gentleman in the back.
It's not open to the public.
No, it's not open to the public. Well, No?
Yeah, I
You
really
wanna
want,
wait till- okay.
we've kind of got to get our
Okay,
heads
okay.
together first. I promise that we will
Okay.
do it
okay,
and come back to certain things, yeah.
okay.
So pick another number.
I don't like 6 in there. I'd be okay
But
with
it's
four.
six,
because there's-
how many of the lots?
There's a couple of lots in here that are a
11
little bit
through
bigger, they're better
20.
configured for it, because they've got multiple access points, so I would rather go down to four. That's just me.
We would just maybe also add, and I'm gonna maybe guess that's what they're asking for here, that we don't include them as permissible along the lots that border Cedar Crest.
I want to focus on Cedar Crest 1 right now.
Okay.
on the-
Right.
We'll get to that one in a minute. I'd like to, again, work through the
Okay.
5316 is the south group. So I think we've already talked about what is bordering on Cedar Crest 1.
Can we do 4 and 2 provisional?
No.
Oh,
Well, all right,
we
so,
decided
It's
later.
4 or 6.
hold on. Hold on. Andrew, do you have any, you're pushing towards 6, right? Is there anything else on that issue before I just check in with everyone?
Well, I have a different issue. If we're
Well,
on that
okay.
same, we're on the same multiple unit thing on one lot thing. If you're gonna go to 6 duplexes, I'm not inclined to run tertiaries on any of these, they're so small. If they're gonna have a secondary dwelling, and are they gonna be able to secondary lot these things? Are they gonna, no further
Right.
No.
subdivision? Okay, so no further subdivision of anything in here. Is that in here? I know it's in,
It's in the subdivision.
it's in
Yeah, it's-
somewhere.
that was a condition.
Okay,
Right.
so I would rather, if they're gonna have a secondary dwelling, like if they have a garage, a little studio apartment or something over it, that doesn't bother me so much. Tertiary dwellings, I think, should be eliminated from this entire discussion. These are too small. They're
Kind
gonna
of agree with Linda.
be
When
wall-to-wall
you start
structure.
having bedroom counts, and then you're looking at tertiary and adding that in, then you have 2
Well, we
bedroom
didn't
main.
agree to a tertiary yet.
No, that's what
No,
I'm
we
saying,
know,
take the
that's what I'm
tertiary
saying,
out.
yeah, that's what I'm agreeing with.
Maybe I could help, Mr. Chairman, through the discussion.
Please.
We're fine with an absolute prohibition of tertiary throughout both of the single-family subdivisions.
Great.
I think just again, the fundamental that we don't want to over-densify the neighborhood and the size of the
Right.
lots.
Right, and as you said,
Well, here's the one other question. about
as you said
I'm
before,
confused.
accessories and secondary will be special permit backed by this board. So
Not
we've got-
sheds.
Right.
That's an accessory structure under the building department. So
Well-
leave the word accessory out of it, just
I think-
only 2 dwelling units per lot, no matter how they're configured. But question for you, you've got a 700 bedrooms, right?
Correct.
Is that in anticipation of people having a secondary dwelling?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the cumulative bedroom cap that we agreed to with the Board of Selectmen before the special town meeting when the zoning was approved, we did some calculations, we had some discussions with the staff. We roughly knew what the apartments were going to be if we had 225 units. Those are right about 360 bedrooms right now. So we've got 340 left over for the 94 lots. And based on that, that's an average of 3.6 bedrooms per lot,
Yeah.
so just under 4. We know the 23 affordable lots are probably going to be a maximum of 3, so they're under that average. So it'll leave an average on the remaining 79 lots, which includes the housing Nantucket lots, the 3 lots we're conveying to them, of right around 4, and we're comfortable with that. I think Mr. Callahan said, if you do a duplex, you do a 2 and a 2, that equals 4, or you do a single-family home, that's 4. It's the same math. So
Well, how do you?
that's where the limit came from.
How, once this is built out and people bought them, they're all in separate ownership now, which is why I'm so hot to trot on the homeowners association document. We were at Abrams, we were at Beach Palm, every one of these things has had a homeowners document submitted. So that's kind of the guts of what I'm looking for next week. But once they're all built and all sold out, and somebody wants to go and build a garage with a bedroom in it, that's gonna put you, let's say theoretically, at 701. How do you control putting a putting a walk-down egress windows, having another bedroom in the basement, so you're up to 4 or 5 bedrooms in a single house because they've added kids, they've added a garage apartment, whatever. How do you limit it to 700 bedrooms once they are completely out of your control?
That's what Mr. Butler and Mr. Knoll do, partly for a living.
Well, they're not putting all 600 applications together to see how many bedrooms are in there. They're not doing that.
Well, if,
Andrew, go ahead.
So how are you dealing with that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we've already talked about the fact that no more than 4 bedrooms can be approved on any lot anyway. That's a condition they want. So,
Right.
it's really, it's enforced through not only zoning, but through the covenant of the planning board. So it has to be enforced, of course, like anything. And you can't just assume things aren't going to be enforced.
No, I
Can't
just
do
don't know
that.
how you enforce it on that many units.
It's enforced through a $300 a day fine. It's enforced on not issuing the building permit for these things. I mean, if there's a condition that they can't put those kind of, I mean, you can put that they can't have those windows, but I think some people want to use the basement for bedroom purposes. There are plenty of people that do
I know,
that.
but I just didn't know if there was a mechanism in the homeowners or somebody, property manager or something that you've already built out the 700 and then someone comes in for 701, the building department isn't going to know. But I don't mind if I'm not the ZBA, who stupidly did not allow them to put egress windows in those basements. But I'm not worried about egress windows in basements or walk downs or an extra bedroom. I just didn't know, I didn't want them, the whole thing, to get in violation of a permit because somebody put a garage apartment in and the building department isn't adding them all up. And somewhere along the line, somebody gets a hair across their rear and said, oh, now we're at 701. I don't want you to have to deal with that headache, or us to deal with that headache. So I didn't know if there was a mechanism that anybody had contemplated when we're talking about extra units once it's built out. That was the only question I had. I didn't know how to do that, because I hadn't seen anything quite this large before.
Yeah, I don't think there's another neighborhood that's actually restricted themselves like this, which is, again, what we're dealing with, which on the upside, we are restricting ourselves like this because what that may mean is maybe 1 or 2 will kind of go over the edge, but not 30 or 40. And so I think we being part of a neighborhood that had a number of restrictions on it, and probably the most restricted neighborhood in terms of year-round in Pine Valley, I mean, it's self-enforced. I mean, it just is. And the neighborhood association is strong, and the individuals are aware. But I'm going to say this publicly, even where folks have that extra bedroom or do something, they do it very discreetly. And they're very careful about where they put the extra car. And maybe that's a benefit in the long term for those 3 or 4 that might slip through. But I think that in practice what we've seen is that ultimately neighbors learn to respect neighbors, particularly if there's rules, and it's just about as best we can say.
It's only as good as the homeowners association document.
Right.
But anyways,
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if Linda is referring there. I think there was a decision, or maybe a clause in the decision that talks about that you can go above 4 as long as you don't exceed the total.
That's what I'm saying. How do you know?
And that's something that we can't have. It really needs to stick to 4, and then if you want it, you have to come back. So there's got to be a way to account for that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the way we had written it in the draft is there would be no more than 4 without approval of the master developer, in this case, which would be us, through the covenant. If the board wanted to somehow wrap that into the lot configuration review, I'm sure that's something we could.
It would have to. That would have to be something. Otherwise, to Linda's point, she's absolutely right. There'd be no way to track that without that cross communication or cross understanding of what waivers have been granted. So that somehow that's going to have to be tied to the.
and
They give us the right of enforcement.
right. I mean, I'm watching a lot of people right now, all nodding their head on this board.
And I think it's self-enforcing when you have a limit of 4 bedrooms. So if someone chooses to build a 4-bedroom house, they're not going to be able to build a second bedroom with a bedroom or a tertiary. So if they build a 3-bedroom, then they're definitely not going to build a tertiary. We've already eliminated that, so it's going to restrict you to 1 bedroom for the. And I think the building department is definitely going to be able to help when they pull a plan. Somebody applies for a second dwelling, and they see that, oh, you have a 4-bedroom house. Sorry, you're going to be denied that second dwelling. I think Patty says that we both live in a neighborhood that is pretty much self-governing because of those restrictions, and I think that's going to play out in this also.
That's why I brought it up.
There's the other side of the coin is you could get to, a bunch of people could decide to only have 3 bedrooms, and you're going to be 30 bedrooms short of your 700,
So be it.
well, I wouldn't,
Well, no,
no,
we
I
don't
think
want
there ought
it.
to be a mechanism
Yeah.
for them to be able to allow 4 or 5 bedrooms for 5 bedrooms for the remaining 30 lots or something like that.
No, not more
Hold
than
on.
4.
So,
Right, I think,
No, that just screws
if,
the whole
if, I mean, other than count, if we could, if we want to go there, we could count, 4 bedrooms on each lot and then figure out how many, and then, they would just have to come in afterwards. I mean, I think
Yeah.
whether someone builds 3 at this time or not, I mean, they may be waiting to add,
Yeah, that's true.
the extra bedroom later.
You're right, you're right.
Oh, they have more kids.
Yeah, you're right. I take it back.
so,
So however you guys want to word
hang on
that,
for
that's-
once. Yeah, Steve, on
Figure it out.
on
I
this
just, I
topic.
think what Andrew suggests, it makes a lot of sense. There's gotta be some way to track it. If the planning board is gonna vote to kind of do this mini site plan review versus the list of things that are included in the site plan review, that's a separate thought really, but this concept of the number of bedrooms and the totality of the number of bedrooms should be tracked somewhere. The only place I see that it could happen in our process is at the lot configuration review. And I just support that idea somehow to work that in there.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, I think that makes total sense. I think we can wrap that in, as Mr. Vorse suggested, into the lot configuration review, which, again, gives the board full discretion.
Sure. So, Andrew, did you want to pick up from there and see if was there anything else? No? All right.
Can I make one more suggestion?
Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll.
Is when you get these decisions done and everything integrated, I was thinking if you could distribute hard copies to the planning board members on Tuesday rather than email.
Both.
So there's no.
Both.
Okay,
Sure,
both
through you,
is
Mr. Chairman,
fine.
we can do both. We can do the Xeroxing
Not to
and
be a
get 'em all
pain, but
delivered.
that way,
There's,
it doesn't end up going in the
No
trash
question.
bin you have the piece of paper. I think
there's
so.
no question.
At this point, I think that might be a good idea. Okay.
Sure,
I
absolutely.
wouldn't disagree with you.
We'll be glad to coordinate that with the staff. Right.
Yep.
Homeowners. I think we just dealt with a path issue versus the road. Park issue, still looking for stuff there. The handicap access on the sidewalks, is that a given on the site plan?
Yeah, everything will have to meet ADA. It's
Okay.
All
required.
right, you know what, I want to stop right here, because I think we're kind of getting toward ratcheting things in here. So let me check.
I only have one more question, Barry, that I had from last week, that you said
And
wait.
So I do want, all right, then I'll come back to it, but we are going to talk about the parks tonight and get that ratcheted down, so go ahead.
Well, there's no way to do that unless they reconfigure them.
Well,
No disturb buffer, we were talking about that last week, no disturb buffer versus, how do you define that and what the distance was? Because we really never came to a complete resolution on that, Andrew. And I think it was between those and maybe the Cedar Crest guys and the Daffy guys and the Mayflower guys,
Well, Mr. Chairman, let's, again, if we can focus on
the Cedar Crest then.
Sandpiper Place 1.
Yeah.
The buffer area, it abuts the actual road, so it doesn't apply there. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply where it abuts any of the apartment use.
Is that pretty much the Cedar, the number 2 instead of the number 2 north? Is that where it would come into play?
Yes.
All right, I'll save it for there. Because that would be lot 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, those guys that are right there.
Wait, which ones?
These,
Okay,
Andrew,
that's in the
these guys right here.
Sandpiper 2. So,
Yeah, north, so I'll hang on to that for that one.
Yep.
Lots 27, 30, 31.
Are those behind, who are those next to?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, those lots are required to be within the 20-foot buffer. 26, 27, the edge of 29, 30, and 31.
No, is that, we were trying to decide what it was. It's not a no disturb buffer.
No.
And it's not free of impediments. What is it?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we've drafted in the decision is that there would be no occupiable structures allowed in there, but there would be accessory structures
Shed.
as defined in your existing bylaw, so it's consistent with the existing bylaw.
Playground, that kind of stuff. Is there a prohibition on pools in here?
There is not. We did say last week that we'd be glad to add that.
I think you need to add that.
Prohibited in the buffer.
Well, no pools. Are we dealing with no pools anywhere?
Through
Last
you,
thing
Mr.
you
Chairman,
want
we
is
haven't
200 pools.
necessarily thought that through in any detail. I'm not even sure what review that normally comes under. We do have relatively efficient-sized lots here, with the exception of the buffer lots. I'm not sure that would really be something that would come into play significantly.
It will.
What's the normal review process?
HDC, but you can X them out. They did, I believe, in Beach Plum. Certainly in Abrams Quarry, they're X'd out, and they're X'd out in Sachem, but they're specifically X'd out. So I think between now and next week, maybe you might want to think about that.
Are you referring to in-ground pools or above and below? Because that gets
Both.
a little tricky. You know,
Both, because I know in Andrew 3M, there are some issues with above-ground pools versus in-ground pools versus whether they're a structure because they have a deck attached to them above ground. It could end up looking just like Long Island
Can I?
with a fence and a pool because everyone has to have a fence with the pool. Personally, I'd rather see no pools allowed in here. But that's something I want you to think about between now and then. And we're not talking kiddie pools. We're talking above ground and in-ground pools.
I'm just feeling a little sensitive to the fact that we have affordable housing in here and we're putting more restrictions on it than we have anywhere else on the island. I'm not a big fan of pools, frankly, so I'm not trying to defend that. But I'm also saying, these folks have a right to live too, and they have a right to have the same rights that everybody else has. Ultimately, that could be a neighbor, to neighbor situation. I don't know. I'm just feeling a little bit like, taking away every single possible
Andrew?
Well, they're restricted on the other big developments, just telling you that. So what I want you to do is just think about how you want to deal with it, because if you have 200 some odd individual houses, and every one of them wants a pool, which seems to be the one thing coming through the HDC all the time,
for $1
then
million homes.
then you've got, no, for all kinds of homes, kids' that grew up with my daughter's homes. The problem is that they require big fences,
Oh, no.
they require screening, and what you could end up in here is something totally alien to what your intentions were, which is every single yard having a big fence around it and screening, and it looks just like the backyards. If you're flying over Long Island, you can't miss it. So I'm just wondering where you want to go with how much accoutrement you allow in these yards. So just think about it.
Well, perhaps we'll look at some of the other developments and look at the language there.
Can I ask you a question?
Just think
Andrew?
about it.
Andrew,
Yes.
that's still under the purview of the HDC, correct? The pools?
Yes.
Yeah, but they can't deny it
Let
because
them-
they hate it.
You know what? Let them deal with it.
They wish they could.
Okay, but let them deal with it as a board. Let them deal with it, because we could argue this back and forward all night.
Well, Barry, I'm just worried because of what the result is, and you're going to have 200 some odd individual backyards surrounded by fences and hedging. Is that really what you want it to look like, and is that really Nantucket's development, and are we going to get nailed for that?
I don't see 200. I really don't.
How many houses are in there?
First of all, it's pretty expensive to build a swimming pool.
Yeah.
No, they got a whole new
So,
way to do
and
it.
I think,
They got a whole new way to do it, one-eighth the
but
price.
I think, again, it's under the purview of the HDC. I'll be very upfront with that. It's under the purview of the HDC. If that is their desire and wishes under which to do it for this, let them deal with
To
it.
be fair,
They cannot say, I don't like it.
We could do what we want. We
Yeah,
have the right to
as a
restrict
special,
it. I'm
yeah,
just saying,
right.
I'm not saying I'm for or against, I'm just saying, that's what
And,
this is for.
okay, but if it comes, yeah, I understand that.
It's going to become a
We can't
problem.
just say that
But-
we can't, because we can.
But
It's up
we-
to you guys.
You know, again, where do we
Right
keep?
across the street in our shop, they have a community pool,
Yeah.
but none of the individual homes have a pool.
Right, they're not allowed to.
Yeah. So maybe there's language, as David was
Just
saying,
talking to Catherine about it.
that might come to light, that makes it easier.
Apparently, they're
somebody in-
restricted as well.
Yes,
What's
somebody in Abrams actually had a kiddie pool, and one of the other neighbors went after them because they had a little 2-foot-high kiddie pool. So that's what I'm saying. Sachem's not allowed to have it, and Beach Plum was going to have a community one. I think they have one, right? And that's how that was handled. They had a community pool.
They're now increasing
So
the
just,
size of the
however you want to deal with it, just be
As the
aware
kids
that
get
this may become an issue.
We may exempt kiddie pools.
That was crazy.
God, do you remember the old poem about the treehouse? God forbid you try that, okay?
They've
Because
gone
I'm
after
just-
treehouses.
Yeah, never mind.
Which is crazy.
Is a
Kind of
treehouse
an
considered a
inside joke
tertiary
in the
dwelling, or
poem.
is it
I'm
just a
not gonna-
playhouse?
I'm not
The
gonna
FCC's
elaborate.
gone after tree houses.
All right,
All right, turn the page.
all right, turn the
Moving in.
page. Thank you. Thank you.
We're gonna revisit that.
All right,
think we
so,
have to talk about
did you
pools.
have anything down there?
I did, but we turned the page, and I'm not gonna get into it.
Good, thank you. Thank you. All right.
It was supportive on both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
Let me just make that comment. What the hell?
Don't
What
go
the
there
heck?
don't go there with the fence here.
Wait on
No,
in.
I mean, I understand, you know, some of us are thinking Linda's in the weeds with this stuff, but these are details that are important because we are really the body that is planning the use, where these people are going to hang their hats.
The 40B.
And we know, based on discussion around the island for the last several years, that pools are a hot button issue. I'm not speaking for or against, I'm just saying that it is something that's relevant. I think that there is plenty of space under the site plan review that we're waiving a lot of for this lot reconfiguration review for pools to be discussed. And I'm not suggesting we do. So that was one point I wanted to make. The other point I wanted to make is, you know, there are other 40Bs on the island, and based on the representations that you've made, that you want this to be a nice upscale place, and I don't question that, and I don't mean to intend that. Beach Plum Village is one of them. It's the most recent 40B I'm aware of that fits that kind of mold that you're speaking about. And they have a community pool because they don't allow pools in the individual yards. And not only do they have a community pool, but my understanding is they're in front of the HDC. They were in front of the HDC to remove the one they built because it was too small, and they're putting in a larger one. I'm not suggesting you put in a pool. I'm just saying that it is an issue, and it is something that comes up for these people. So
And these big
that was all I wanted to add.
The big developer.
Okay, thank you.
Pass a hat around this neighborhood 20 years, but build one yourself.
No.
Build a pool for the whole place someday.
The liability is huge, but everybody else is.
So, sorry.
Or you could
No,
go to the
no,
beach.
go ahead.
I mean, you
Go
could
ahead.
have
No, I was
agencies
referring to my last comment.
Everybody has
Don't be-
certain things now
don't be.
that they weren't having 25 years ago.
Yeah, so they
Yeah.
have to account for that
Are we
stuff.
gonna
So-
are we moving on to the parks here? Or are we
One question, are
Let's-
these all air-conditioned, all the houses, or just the apartment buildings that you're doing?
Well, we can't speak for the ones we're selling, the lots we're selling, obviously, but we're developing, yes, with full
So
air
yours are
conditioning.
gonna, so you might want on your site plan show where those are. But the other thing that we brought up last week isn't on here, is where the trash, Andrew and I talked about the trash, the dumpster locations.
That's in the apartments, right?
Apartments.
Yeah, so we'll
Well,
get there.
Yeah, but you know darn well that Miles Reese isn't stopping at 200 houses. So I didn't know if there was,
We're not going to do community trash bins, no.
okay, over at the apartments, you're gonna have
Yes.
dumpsters enclosed.
Right.
Okay.
And the HVAC, we can't really tell until we know a design of the house, Linda, so.
You're gonna do centralized post office boxes and all that stuff.
No, actually, that's for the apartment.
I thought we were
houses
sticking on
too?
Sandpiper one.
Right.
We are,
Right,
because
we are.
they are also individual houses, and some of these
Yeah.
and developments have a centralized post office, they're not individual.
Well, we haven't talked to the post office yet, so we need to do that first. But the way we're going to handle it with the apartments, and I know we're not there yet, is we've already talked to Mike Boylan to take care of all that, so.
Great.
Well, he's right around the corner.
Right.
But just so you know, in Sachems, they made them put in a centralized
Right.
box, and they're all individual houses of lots very similar to these. So just
We'll put it in a pocket park.
keep that in mind, pocket ones.
Okay.
I've actually dealt with this quite a bit, and I know at Oshup they've got a facility built with mailboxes. The post office provides that a fee, and then they'll do a central delivery.
Yeah.
I came across this several years ago in managing communities, and it's come up a couple of times since then. Most recently, when my company managed the Beach Plum Village community, the same type of thing. The post office is requesting that what they call a central drop, but it is a series of small boxes where people have locked access. And it's Nashawquisset, I guess Linda just said Sachems, Beach Plum, and
Housing Authority.
there's
made
two
us do
others,
it.
I think. The
Bridge
point
out
is
in-
simply just, I think you're going to be required to do it. They aren't. What happens, the rationale we were given is that because you have a mixed, despite I understand these are year-round leases, you have homes that are some are occupied year-round, some are not. And the post office on Nantucket, at least at that time, I don't want to put words in the postmaster's mouth, was not capable of taking on additional routes or expanding routes, especially if it was kind of a mixed type of a community, whether they're year-round or not, if their homes aren't occupied year-round. So they were requiring these facilities. I'm just mentioning it so you have the details. Please look into it on your own. But you may want to plan for it, because if you don't, planning for it in advance might mean that you change a little bit here and there so that you don't lose a lot, whereas in some instances lots had to be given up in order to accommodate the requests. So I just mentioned that for your.
They did do that on Westchester. They only went up as far as just beyond Pilgrim, and they refused to deliver mail any further. They had to leave all those boxes down on the little thing.
Right.
Because they wanted to put one of those monster things down on Westchester Street, not happening. So they all sort of had to come to an agreement and rebuild the thing so it was in better shape, but they refused to add them to the rural delivery. So I would have that conversation much sooner than later.
Okay.
As to how they want to handle this. This is going to be way over her head. It's going to be coming from somebody else in Boston.
Okay.
Andrew?
Mr. Chairman, I had a question for Steve. In Naushop, was there coordinated trash pickup, or was it done by individual homeowner?
I'm not positive of Naushop. Naushop was coordinated. But it was coordinated primarily because they have a very comprehensive rental program. So what would happen is, as a service, it went out to bid. The service provider, whoever won the bid, would come in on whatever day it was, and they would go to each of the homes. Most of the homes have a 4x8 shed, so that the trash was accessible, but also, for small bikes and things like that, so they weren't out in the yard. So that's how they handled it. Some of the owners, there was always an option if you were a resident to opt out and take it to the dump yourself.
I would call Naushop and see
Our,
how they're dealing with it. I've seen two
Our
different
homeowners
providers.
association requires the garbage cans to be in an enclosed, and I believe it specifies dimensions and everything else. So, in fact, where I'll go is to Pine Valley's homeowners association rules and regs, because they're pretty comprehensive.
Okay.
Just for clarity, so in Pine Valley, though, do homeowners get their own?
Yes.
I mean, it's not done
Individual.
as a
Yeah.
group.
It's individual.
You enter your own
I don't believe Naushop is either. I think that's individual.
individuals. as well.
Because I've seen two different trucks in there.
But there is restrictions on how the trash is kept.
Right.
Almost every house in the shop that I've worked on has a shed. I don't know what's in the shed, but they all have little trash enclosures.
Okay.
Usually.
So, I think there's one burning topic still that we need to flush out here, which the board seems to be passionate about, is the park issue, which may be worth, as we're getting further along with these things, well, they've heard from you. There's
Not
no
just
question.
me.
No, they've heard. I think tonight they've specifically heard from you, but I don't think the rest of the board has really had an opportunity to weigh in, and it is going to come up. So I think, do you have any other comments you'd like to offer before I turn it over to hear from everyone else? What?
You're looking at Kernet, right?
I'm looking at
Because
Linda.
I think when they redo the schematic for the apartment buildings, and that we can take care of on the final landscape plan that we signed through the subdivision part of it,
Right.
because we don't have to sign it if we're not comfortable with that. It's very difficult to put, I think, in the special permit, other than you will make provision, you might want to add a phrase, that you will make provision for recreational or open space, or however you want to calculate it, that is apart from the walkways and the sidewalks.
Right. No, I
in
think we
appropriate
understand.
locations.
I think we understand, and I think Linda's absolutely right. It's going to come with a reconfiguration of the buildings. And again, I think I gave you a little bit of insight as to why we did them the way we're doing them. We did them in the first place. And I do think there will be a mix. We will have an entry. We'll try to simplify that entry park a little bit more. But at the same time, we will try. We will open up fields, larger spaces and also accommodate some smaller play areas. So we'll do that.
But as I say, I think we can take care of it through the site plan review.
Okay.
Can I just say something real quick? Just to hold that, right, what you said, Patty, I think if you could make one park work for, something bigger than what it was originally conceived, I think that would be good enough as far as the big one. I don't think you have to make every one of them big enough to play football, and that's not going to happen. But to throw a football, to kick a soccer ball a little bit, but have maybe one, but, Linda was saying reconfigure the pilots, whatever, but the other smaller ones, I think, is fine. It's just that trying to get one that's a little bit bigger makes a lot of sense if that can happen.
Mr. Warren?
I know all these different things have been touched on. I don't want to get back into the pool discussion. I think we can bring that up in another, I don't know. Whatever. That's complicated. I mean, you got market rate lots. You have to make, you're trying to make money on something in this thing. You know what I'm saying? I get what you're saying. It's a different world. Every house is air conditioned. Every house is potentially going to have something that they never had 25 years ago. Downstairs basements are finished, insulated on the outside, heated in the cement. It's normal. It's normal now to do that. I mean, every house gets lifted up, movie theaters, the whole package. I mean, it's true. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean we're on Rodeo Drive. This is normal.
I didn't want to bring up the pool again, and
but I'm trying to just.
There might be a compromise.
I'm trying to, but John, you know what I'm trying to do? You go in every house. You know what I'm talking about.
But no, the individual housing might be restricted to an individual pool. However, you leave open the possibility of a potential community pool based on
That's
the association,
which
is similar to North Shop, which is similar to the 40B beach plum, but it restricts individual, but it lets you.
That was my next thing.
Well, you can combine a couple.
Maybe because I'm sick or not.
Okay.
No, but to John's point, what I was about to get to that is, I don't think this isn't going to be the Chicken Hill little thing. It's not going to be like that for these market rate lots. But the community thing, it's possible that could happen, and I was going to suggest sort of penciling in an area that might be able to work on. I don't know if that's possible for you to do, but down the road, as this materializes over a generation, that could John's talking about could very easily happen. I don't think it's going to get. It's not like a situation where you can plan it now, but definitely a space.
But it might
you know what I'm saying? It
on
could.
Its own as they sell the lots, and then they realize the lots maybe not as selling as quickly, and maybe an added bonus of a community pool would help to sell the lots because it's a nice feature.
Yeah. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
That's all I could think of right now.
So do you want to chime in further? And any
No,
thoughts?
that's
because you know what, we've got to start giving them some sense of where we're going at this point. No, just let me finish. Just let me finish for 30 seconds, okay? I was just concerned when I heard you say, "Well, we'll talk about it at a next meeting." I think since these things since they're coming up, I think to the applicant, we owe them that due diligence at this point to kind of flesh it out for them, so that we're not back here in another meeting, winding up either going in different directions again, or finally saying what we really should have said at the very beginning and onset of things.
Can we ask the
So-
applicants?
What?
No, how they feel about what we talked about, individual pools or non, or they for or against, or possibility of community later on, or is there just too many suggestions now to really?
I mean, obviously, we need to talk to Phil Paston. I think that's what we're probably waiting to do and see what his gut feeling is, and he's not here tonight. Otherwise, we'd be able to confer with him. I think, John, you put your finger on it. We want to make sure that the market rate houses are competitive, too. So, again, this might be a real estate question that we ask. I don't know. But in order for where we draw the line and how we draw the line, I mean, there's other issues. There's noise. I mean, there's issues with, and I was just talking to Catherine. You're absolutely right. There are other neighborhoods where there's a restriction. You know, it's not like
Yeah.
we're not 10 minutes from the beach, so I don't know, but we'll
And
have to see.
the noise was the biggest reason why they restricted all the other ones in the
Right.
small lot
Can,
size.
can I get to the rest of the board members, though? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I just,
Oh.
well, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no.
No, I'm sorry, so,
Thought you were looking
you
for-
are
Going in.
on the park issue?
Okay.
Let's
All right, we're
comment.
sticking. The only question, I was reading the staff report from October 3rd, and they labeled the lot number 91. Is that, am I reading that correctly? Including 191 open space lot. So in the plan that you've labeled 91, is that, am I correct in that is considered an open space lot? Or am
No,
I
it's
wrong?
95.
95 must be, yeah,
95.
the real lot, yeah.
It just looks like it's 91.
Yeah, but it's this one that's useless.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's drainage.
It's just an
Well, it's good, it's good
It's the
for
pool.
open space.
Okay. There you go, a possibility.
Well, I'm going to ask, is there anything that the staff or any of the board members see that if they integrate everything we've talked to about tonight by Tuesday, that there would be an impediment that's going to arise? Well, I'd kind of like to get to the end of it. In other words, if we're just going to get a little closer, I'd kind of like, because it seems to me like we're 99% there, I'd like to get to 100%. So if there isn't anything that really sticks out, and they write a good decision integrating all this stuff, are we there, at least on this one?
We'll come back to, I hear what you're saying at this point. So, just on those
Okay.
two issues, though, did you have,
No,
No.
that's it.
Carl?
I'm no fool.
Well,
I don't like
just am looking at the, are we still focusing on Sandpiper
fool.
We
One
are
right
on
now?
Sandpiper.
1 and 2 started to.
1 and
We're
2?
on Sandpiper 1, and trust me, I'm going to check in a few minutes on 2. But
I would,
Let's go to
I
Sandpiper.
have some sort of ambiguous feelings about pools. I think, the noise issue could be an issue, but I tend to agree with Ms. Raghaveen that it's a restriction. I don't know if we should make that restriction on these lots. If they could have a second dwelling, that's an impact, and if they have a pool, that's an impact. So I don't feel comfortable restricting them to no pools per se. And it's just, it's hard to tell. I mean, it's a very densely populated area, but I mean, I just don't feel comfortable with that restriction. And I'm looking at the Meadows 2 schematic, and I'm looking at number 4, and there's some space between those two buildings to the left of number 4 already. As those are configured, I understand they may be reconfigured even further. And that looks like some open space where you could throw a ball around or something. So I think there's a real potential for the final product to address some of the issues with a bigger park. I actually like the 2 pocket parks as they are. And I think that with these buildings being reconfigured down the road, I think you're going to find more space, more open space for more play. So I'm comfortable with that. I'm not so worried about kids in the street. I think it's a legitimate concern, but I think there's going to be room for these things for some areas there. And that's about all I have to say right now.
David?
Probably not for taking away the personal property rights of people buying market rate units to do the pool, to eliminate the pool. And if we're going to go up to the Meadows 2 apartments, I just have a little concern about the number of parking spaces.
Yeah, we're really we're not really prepared to go there yet.
Okay.
But it's going to come up, and I think it's just so you get a forecast. But anyways, yeah.
Otherwise, I'm fine, with a good, strong homeowners association. And I think we can move that one along.
Steve?
I'm not going to get into the pool. I do think, I would like to find out, I know we're not talking about Meadows 2, but we've talked about the parks, and we've talked about part of one of the parks is going to be in relation to a reconfiguration. So I would, at some point, and I'll make a note if it's not now, I'd like to get as a point of information when that reconfiguration will be and how that will play out. We don't have to deal with it now if we want to stick on the Sandpiper one, but I did want to bring that up.
You know, I think that simplifying that entrance park will just be a matter of removing some things at this point. What Linda did say earlier was that, you know, under your final site plan review, which will be, you know, a few more working weeks on this, we're going to be vetting that with staff and maybe coming back to the board if you'd like us to. So my question to you is, do you want us to make the fire drill happen and have this in your packet, you know, at least another configuration of that entrance park that's simplified? The fact of the matter is that the building reconfiguration will take a little bit of thought in engineering. You know, the entrance park will probably just take a removal of some of the structures and or the plantings, depending. And so we could do the fire drill on that or not, and just leave that to final site plan review with your comments noted. Up to you.
Is that
Yeah, I just would like to think that the planning board, through the public hearing process, will look at the reconfiguration before we're drafting conditions for approval for that.
So I think it's,
I'm
The
not
park
talking about just the parks, I'm saying, you know, the buildings. It's a fundamental aspect of that subdivision.
That'll be like,
And, you know,
Can you do it?
so, we can talk about it when we get to Meadows, but that's gonna be a point that I think is very valid.
and I think we're saving Meadows specifically for that reason, because
Okay.
it does kind of bring a higher level of complexity to things. But it's good, I think it's good too to be starting to talk to them about
I was
this.
trying to introduce it.
Yeah, so that there's at least some broadcasting by the board about some issues that may come up with it. But I really would like us to kind of focus down on that as well too. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I would ask that we be very cognizant and writing off, you know, signing off on the lot configuration review. I mean, essentially what that is we're required under 23 to do a site plan review for the whole community, for the whole special permit application. And what we're doing, what's been proposed is that we do the concept review that's occurred, and in part as part of the subdivision and as part of the application that's been presented to us to date. But then we do it that level of detail more at the tail end on a per lot basis, which I don't have any issue with, but I think we need to be aware as a board that that's what we're doing. We need to acknowledge that. I do think that there are some things within the draft language that I am uncomfortable with. I think that well, basically we've taken, you know, 4 pages of bylaw and condensed it into a paragraph. The site plan review stipulates certain criteria, the performance standards, the review process, the administration. We've taken it, we've boiled it down from 4 pages to 1 paragraph. I would ask that we include some of those things, not many, but some of the things that have been taken out, which is, for instance, it's been proposed that the structure, I'd want to include use of those lots as part of that review, which is part of our purview. The proposed structures are included, and the location on the lot are included in the proposed lot configuration review. I would like to see use added. And I would also like to see, there was a couple other things in there. It seems, bear with me a second. I mean, it seems to me that would be a good place for a final sign off on the landscaping that's part of our purview. And it seems to me that, is it commonplace that the zoning board would be the review authority or the adjudicatory authority in matters of dispute between an applicant on a special permit and the planning board?
No.
Okay, well, that's the language that's in the lot configuration review, and I would ask that that be struck, if that's the case.
Was there anything else?
I think that's pretty much a lot.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure at this point.
If I could, just on that point, Mr. Chairman, the reason that was structured in the draft condition that way is that we thought there needed to be some recourse to an applicant who might get denied by the planning board, and that seemed to be the logical place to put it, as opposed to the Board of Selectmen or straight to court. So some other means may be perfectly acceptable, but I think there needs to be some recourse if the planning board, if the subsequent applicant feels aggrieved.
Yeah. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that? Because that really is almost your expertise again.
If the planning board denies something as part of a special permit, you don't get to go to the zoning board. I don't, that procedure
Yeah, that was weird.
isn't
I don't think
comfortable
that's
to me at
correct.
all. It's,
No.
you either come to the planning board or you go to court. I mean, I don't,
The
there's
ZBA
really
is
not an
involved.
interim stop.
Good catch.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah,
might
that's-
suggest, we would revert to what's in the bylaw, which is that the appeal, and I just read this because I'm new at this, so it's not that you guys don't know it, I'm just trying to get up to speed, so it was fresh. But it stipulates that any appeals from the decisions of the applicable permit granting authority, I'm paraphrasing, for site plan review shall be made in accordance with MGLC 40A, which is 40A is what we all work under, and I'm sure that there's some procedure there
Yeah.
that's
It goes to
outlined.
court.
So it goes to court.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not making up language, we're referring to what's in the bylaw.
Yeah. That's a good
So
catch.
take that out. I saw that the other day and going, I thought maybe there was something I missed.
No, good catch.
So use and the appeals, I think, and the landscaping, I think, are the three things that I would be concerned about, to summarize.
Just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, by use you mean multiple dwellings or a larger use under the bylaw? Because obviously in the R5, there's a fairly limited amount of uses that are
I'm
permitted.
sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking of, I mean, we're obviously restricted by the zoning to residential, so either a multifamily purpose or individual single-family dwellings, whether there's more than one on a lot or not. I was thinking in terms of whether it's a single-family, it's a regular use would be, is it a secondary dwelling or is it a duplex as opposed to a single-family dwelling? And that ties into the point that was made earlier where Andrew had suggested we put the lot configuration review, put the number of bedrooms into that somehow. If use is part of the lot configuration review, that's complementary to be able to review whether, and it also gives us some control. We've talked about, well, we'll have no more than one duplex every 6 homes or something like that. I don't recall what it was, but it gives the planning board control that was intended to be done up front at the tail end if use is included. I'm not suggesting to use it to be restrictive, but I don't understand why we would waive the rights and the responsibilities under the bylaw just because we're putting it at the tail end. So yes, the answer is use would be duplex or secondary dwellings, in my mind.
Thoughts, Andrew?
Well, I think where we are, we're limiting these to 6 duplexes, isn't that correct? So,
yeah.
with the conditions that they're not going to be 2 next to each other, they're going to be spread out, so they're not going to be directly across the street. So that's something we would review as they come in for building permits.
That should be in the special permit, that language, right?
And it will be. That's already noted. So I haven't heard you talk about other than, I mean, I think the single-family allowance, you're allowing, so there could be a 3-bedroom with a 1-bedroom rental or something like that. You're all comfortable with that?
Yeah.
So that would be allowed on the rest of them, right? And then, so there's a limit of 4 bedrooms. If they want more, they have to come back to the planning board and say, we have some extra bedrooms or people have limited themselves and we want to add extra bedrooms on lot 18 or something like that. So you'll get a chance to look at that in the future.
So to be, just so I'm clear through you, Mr. Chairman, you think that it's covered and it doesn't need to be in the lot configuration review, or
No, I
I
think
it
that
should be in there.
the condition is 4 bedrooms maximum per every lot.
Yeah.
So, and then as they build out, if they have some extra bedrooms that they want to apportion to one lot or another, they have to come back, identify which lot that is, and you all get to look at that.
But it doesn't need to be in the lot configuration review, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So,
There you go, it's okay.
so I'd retract use, but I do think the landscaping and the appeal authority are kind of important to retain.
Oh, yeah, we
Okay.
said that.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. Okay. So, all right, before we go to public hearing, I know they've been very patient, but this is important that we get our thoughts together down first to guide the applicant into the appropriate places and work with them to get this thing to begin to gel. So, two things I have for you at this point. Do you feel you have fairly good appropriate guidance with where we're at, and Tuesday could be a reasonable time frame under which to get this resolved with staff?
Absolutely. I think we've heard enough direction, Mr. Chairman, and through the staff. There's 8 or 10 things that I've heard, mostly the list of subject areas that Mr. Vorse went through, and as long as the staff will give us their usual and customary amount of time over the next couple days to wrap up some of the details, we're fully confident we can do that.
All right, good. I just want it to be very clear at this
As long
point.
as the board will vote not to allow Leslie and Andrew to go to the Caribbean over the next week, we're fine with that.
Unless we can all go.
That's right, unless it's the entire
Group
conference
trip.
at that point. All right, so the other question I have to ask, and I'm sure the board will groan just a tad bit, but I am going to ask it anyways. Sandpiper 2, in my mind, is that a reminder for me?
It's Grover.
You're early.
Sorry.
That's okay. Sandpiper 2, in my mind, is so close to what we're doing with Sandpiper 1. Is that, I would love us to kind of get that down to the same level. Is that something that is accomplishable within a short term or a long term? And I really kind of want to hear back from both Andrew and you guys. Sir?
So I have a few separate questions on that one that are distinct from the other one.
Right.
So, again, I think do you want me to start this?
Yeah.
That's,
Well,
are you guys?
Well, I would
kinda-
say, so decision-wise, we're set for Sandpiper 1.
And we,
And there might be, so that'll be a very similar decision, but we're going to add what we're going to talk about
The
now.
generalized conditions, I think, apply, but there's some specific ones in terms of,
yeah,
And that's where the buffers are.
That's
Do you want
good.
to open to public hearing just for Sandpiper 1 to
I-
see if there's something?
can do that. I just wanted to get some time frames here, check in with you guys as well too, to see where you're at.
Well, did they have to
before-
comment, Barry, on the first one, or
I
just comment overall, the audience?
just-
Comment
I'm
overall?
probably going to open it up to one right now. But I just wanted to be clear about where we're heading to.
I'm cool.
Oh, okay, good. I just wanted to check in with you
And
guys.
that's the end of my book.
What's that?
Then that would be it for this evening.
I think if we can, because like I said, in my mind, and I think I'm hearing from staff as well too, and hopefully Mr. Arminetti and Mr. Rogan will concur, that, there's enough similarity here to where I think we might be able to do both. And get that.
Absolutely. We feel the same way.
So let me open it up to the public and see what you guys have to say on Sandpiper 1. I'd really welcome new comments. We've heard a lot of things in the past, so thank you.
Hello, Scott Allen, 25B Daffodil Lane again. I want to talk about and go back to lots 20 through 26. Again, facing Cedar Crest 1's homeowners association, but connected to Cedar Crest 3. We share the same deeds and restrictions as a homeowners association, built by the same genius, Mr. Glowacki, same documents, looks exactly the same. These lots are supposed to be single-family homes. These are 20,000 square foot lots that a number were broken down condo-wise into 10,000 square foot lots. So we were very happy when you guys said that we were going to be looking at 10,000 square foot lots facing onto our subdivision. Now we're talking about
single-family homes with secondary dwellings, which is essentially 5,000 square foot lots. So I'm asking, I'm not a board member of my HOA, but I'm married to one, so I'm just a resident in the community. I'm asking for those to be restricted, just like mine is in the HOA, to not have a secondary dwelling on a 10,000 square foot lot. That allows a buffer between us and the division next door. As soon as you have a secondary dwelling there, it's one driveway with 2 homes on it, which is essentially what I'm on. But a 10,000 square foot lot, you're essentially making 5,000 square foot lots. That's my only input. You guys sort of glassed over it, and we said no tertiary dwellings. If you look at the remainder, I mean, you can sort of see the ghost map under there. Those are 10,000 square foot lots with one driveway. To add secondary dwellings, they're 5,000 square foot lots with one driveway. So we would ask that those 7 lots that face onto our subdivision, 20 through 26, be single family, no secondary, tertiary, or multifamily.
I know that there's a couple of garage apartments and stuff as you get around the corner onto Daffodil. O'Banion and all the rest, there's a couple of them over there.
There are.
And those lots aren't they about the same size as these?
I believe in Mr. O'Banion is a 40,000 square foot lot. I don't know how he worked out his number of bedrooms or how he's got a third dwelling on his property, but...
No, he's got 2.
Okay, so...
That I know of.
That's a 40,000 square foot lot with 2 dwellings.
And I know a lot of these lots are in that weirdo co-op thing.
Right, so that's how you got the 10,000 square foot lot, was by co-oping, which have now been switched over to condos. So
Yeah,
it's
how they do
20,000
it.
square foot lots.
But there are
into
2 on
10,000.
one lot, basically.
Yes, 10,000 square foot lots.
And
20,000
these-
square foot lot with 2 10,000 square foot homes, residences.
How big are these lots again?
10,000 square foot lots.
I'm not sure. I don't have any. In any of the subdivisions I've ever been involved with, either here or the ZBA, we ever restricted a secondary dwelling on a 10,000 square foot lot. All of Hooper Farm, everything between Fairgrounds and the Stop and Shop basically is R10. Those are duplexes and 2 dwellings. I've never restricted a 10,000 square foot lot to have no secondary dwelling, have I? I don't remember ever doing that. It's the little guys, yeah, but not a 10,000 square foot lot.
Sea Canal Place.
Yeah, but they're coming in to fix that.
So just to be clear, I can't do it because of our deeds and restrictions with our condo association. So
Are you on a
you're
co-op
yeah,
also?
yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a condo now.
Yeah.
So again, you're opening up by allowing these 7 lots. You're opening up. The floodgate opens. We've already got some workforce housing on our side of the fence, thanks to a couple of meetings ago.
Are they going to be restricted to the association that's across the street? So if those
They should be. That's why I'm bringing it to your attention.
Well, that's what your attorney has said.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If I could clarify, perhaps, I think Mr. Allen might be mixing between Cedar Crest 1 and 3. The covenants are slightly different, actually. The Cedar Crest 1 covenants, which is the left-hand side, including lots 20 through 26, is actually significantly less restrictive than Cedar Crest 3. There are additional dwellings allowed in Cedar Crest 1. Cedar Crest 3 is more restrictive. I think what we would like to stay consistent on is secondary dwellings could be permitted on the larger 20 through 26 in Cedar Crest 1. Certainly, we're willing, and through our negotiations with Mr. Allen and the Cedar Crest 3 leadership, we've already pretty much definitively talked about limiting the buffer lots along Cedar Crest 3, which on this are 11 through 15, and actually a few more off to the right, from all but primary dwellings. So I think there should be a distinction there. Somewhat based on the precedent of the existing covenant, and also pressed on the difference. The area directly across from Cedar Crest 3 and the Daffodil and Mayflower lots, we're treating differently in our mind, and we're willing to be more restrictive there.
Understood. Those lots that you just referenced are backed up to our neighborhood. So it really doesn't make a difference to me if you'd like to put a secondary dwelling in somebody else's backyard that faces somebody else's backyard. Again, one of those houses being a workforce housing unit that's going to have 12 employees in it. But the ones that do face our development and are using our roads, we're talking about limiting to single-family dwellings, and we'd appreciate it to be single-family dwellings and not making it just more 5,000 square foot lots, which, again, you guys suggested we should have 10,000 square foot lots buffering us to 5,000 square foot lots. So by drawing in these 10,000 square foot lots, we just like them to stay 10,000 square foot lots. And that's all I have to say. just consider it.
Thank you. Anyone else? I see you smiling at me, so come on down. Dave, good evening.
Dave Small, 23 Daffodil. So Mr. Marklinger earlier referenced Lot 96 and said that it couldn't be built through for a particular reason.
I read your letter,
Yep.
and I thought that if we could reserve it to be done in the future, but not now, that might be an okay idea. But I don't know how Andrew felt about it or how Mr. Almanetti felt about that. Because if you can't, if your subdivision is not going to allow people to use it, and apparently they have the right to do that because it's a private road.
but-
I'm just saying, if that is the case, I'm not arguing
No.
at all.
Their subdivision isn't before us. The Richmond subdivision is before us. And people that live in that area may not share this individual's position on this. They will be able to walk into that subdivision and walk back to their own subdivision if they want to.
Okay.
So,
I'm fine.
and there may be people, despite the testimony we've heard, that have friends that live in the new development that want to walk back and forth. So there will be rights throughout those roads for people to walk on them like any other road in the town of Nantucket. If this group wants to try to restrict people that don't live there from walking through, that's their choice.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
But our rules and regulations are clear, and I believe we voted on this several times.
No.
So,
My suggestion was a response to your letter.
I appreciate that.
Go ahead.
So, and there was also a statement about a sewer easement. Was that through that same lot, or
yes.
That wasn't-
which way is it going? 26 to 25, or
The sewer easement would cover all of the roads and all of Lot 96 for sewer and water purposes.
and that would be coming out into the Cedar Crest 1
It would be
connection?
an easement that would allow Cedar Crest 1 sewer connections through it if necessary.
Okay. I'd just like to echo Mr. Allen's sentiments about keeping those lots 20 through 26 as single family, as referenced in prior meetings from Ms. Williams, who wanted to keep them as 10,000 square foot lot buffered lots, parentheses around buffer, for that purpose. Thank you.
Thanks. Did you want
To that point, I just wanted to let the neighbors know that we'd love to sit down and talk with you. We're willing to have that on the table as part of our
okay for a while.
negotiated
It's
agreement.
freezing.
As you know, we're still in negotiations with respect to the cul-de-sacs, and this is exactly the kind of points we'd like to talk about, is those kind of restrictions.
All set?
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else? No. All right. So.
No,
No, because we've
No,
no, I
we
understand
have
that,
to
but
do
we've
stuff
got
next
stuff
week.
coming before us for next
We
week.
can't close it and then take
Right.
any change.
Right.
Are we okay on the deadlines?
We go with deadlines there, Mr. Arminetti, still?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yeah, we've extended everything at least through the end of February, if not through the end of March. I think
Perfect.
2 of them are through the end of March and 1 of them's through the end of February. So I believe we're fine.
So, since there's a fairly good amount of the same that's going to happen, Andrew, let me turn to you, start talking about Sandpiper Place 2 on the north, 5416, and see if we can, see where we can go with that.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, again, I think the area for parking, for the on-street parking, is going to be in front of lots 59 through 66. So, somewhere in there, at least lots 60 to 65, there should be at least one shared driveway. If there's a possibility of getting an access through lot 1 in the apartment group to the back, something you should look at. Lot 71 and 1, those seem to be oversized. I'm just wondering, what are those? Are those going to be treated differently or not?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, on the question. They are oversized in their current configuration. The anticipation is that there might be a need to either do a more substantial traffic improvement at the main entrance at some point over time, or also add some more common landscaping elements there. So I think long-term, those will end up being relatively same size as the ones next to them, maybe a slightly larger, but something else will end up happening on that corner if it's only common landscaping to create more of a dramatic entrance over time.
Okay.
Great.
The area between lots 1 and 2, there's like a little gore in there. Is that what will be donated or be joined with Housing Nantucket to give them frontage?
Correct. That lot, Mr. Chairman, through you, is the duplex unit that came off of Union Street that Housing Nantucket just was in the process of finalizing building. I think they're just waiting for their CO. Yeah. That frontage will be taken from our Road D into our subdivision for the purposes of the plan, so that we would comply explicitly under the by right subdivision lot calculations. That has to be shown that way, but eventually that line will be erased and that lot will take frontage within our subdivision.
Okay. The lot 95, which is you're using for drainage, I guess, is that right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman, through you. That's a fairly substantial infiltration system at the moment, so there'll probably just be either some native or ornamental landscaping on top of the infiltration.
Mr. Chairman, if there was a way to incorporate, some rear parking and extend that through, that would be a place to look for, again, minimizing the driveway cuts and putting some parking. For example, for lot 94 could come off of that, for lot 87, and maybe some of those front ones. I think we've already talked about will there be restrictions on the lots fronting? So that's basically 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 onto the Cedar Crest 3. There was a question last time about the path, how that would be built out or not. Would it contain lighting? I think that was one of the questions. Have you thought about that at all?
Mr. Chairman, through you, not in more detail from last week's conversation. I think the main point from last week was that it would be required to be built out before the end of our Phase 2 and Phase 1B Sandpiper. I think that certainly falls under the prior to final plans, final approval by the planning board condition, that catch-all that's already in there. We'd want some time to be able to flesh that out. And in addition to being able to get some more input from our neighbors, so that it tries to be as sensitive to their concerns as possible as well.
And the total number of lots in this group is how many?
Really testing my public
I
school
know,
math
I know, I'm
skills,
sorry.
Mr. Vorse. Sandpiper 2 is a total of 52 buildable lots and 1 open space lot. That one has 3 lots. Lots 2, 3, and 4 get conveyed to Housing Nantucket. So we end up with 49 buildable lots, 12 of which will be affordable, AMI limited, and 37 of which will be market rate lots.
So, again, I think we should talk about what the maximum number of duplexes might be in that group.
Sure.
Whether it's the same percentage or the same number.
Can you restrict 2, 3, and 4, or they're going to go?
I would say, Mr. Chairman, we haven't had a level of discussion with them to know what their real intent is for those lots. Those are slightly larger. I think they're in the 6,000 square foot range. They do tend to try to maximize their occupancy on the lots that they have, but clearly the planning board has jurisdiction over that. We're required to convey those lots at no cost to Housing Nantucket, but I would say the only thing I would ask is before the board might make a final decision, just to let us communicate with their staff and make sure there's no inconsistency there.
Right. I do think that, again, if it's two-unit duplexes, or it could be a 3-unit and a 3-bedroom and a 1-bedroom, could be. We have examples. I know Leslie built her own duplex as a starter home that is very attractive, so it can be done. And again, these are going to tend to be smaller than some of the ones that we've seen. I guess that's all I have right now, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Good enough. So on this particular aspect of the special permit, Nat, do you have anything more? Linda?
No, just clarify that language for the buffer zone.
Yeah, please.
Wait on the buffer zone.
Yeah.
We grade in the lots that we've sold in Daffodil, the Daffodil neighborhood, and we would like you to consider not looking at the lots that abut them from behind as part of your buffer area. Those individuals bought those lots from us with the full knowledge of what this plan looked like, and that would be lots 15 for sure, 8 and 9, and maybe 10. Depending, because the path comes next. What we're looking at is really buffering the lots 14, 13, and 12 and 11 that are essentially abutting what is a pre-existing neighborhood, and I think that makes some sense.
Okay. Then just call those out.
Okay.
Yeah. So before I go too much, Andrew, do you want to just throw out a thought on the duplex issue, just so we can kind of frame that topic so it's not floating around in terms of what? Or do you really want some time with that?
Well, it's really about picking a number, isn't it?
It really is.
I think 7 and then exclude 2, 3, and 4 and have them be like a site plan review or something like that.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Does that kind of sound good to you guys?
Yeah.
Consistent.
Okay.
No.
All right. I'm not hearing any no's.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think that's fine, unless, if I'm doing my math wrong, if the board wanted to apply the same proportion, it would be 9 out of 37.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same with a quarter.
I'm fine with more. Yeah.
9 out of 37 would be 25%, the same that you were going to apply in Sandpiper 1.
Andrew, Leslie, what do you think?
And I believe the same would apply. None would be able to be directly abutting. None would be able to be directly across the street.
That's going to limit it. That might reduce it less than 9 by doing that with the 6, because I don't think you have the space there to space those 9 out. I think that 9 would be pretty much a cap, and the placement would reduce it even more.
Yeah.
I believe, through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe you're right, and especially once you layer in the affordable AMI restricted units, that's going to come into play. So,
all right.
Thank you.
I'm fine with
No, that's good. Thank you. So, do you have anything?
No, that's good.
Joe?
I'm good.
Carl?
Good.
David? Steve?
We're on Sandpiper 2.
Yes, sir.
We're talking about this as relates to the follow-up from Sandpiper 1 and to kind of wrap the whole thing up. Is that?
Yeah, because again, as I said, there seems to be a fair number of similarities. There were a few things that I thought staff wanted to address.
Yeah, no, I'm good with it. I just wanted to make sure. I do have one comment.
Yeah,
I
please.
want to clarify on what I'm calling the LCR, which is that lot configuration review.
He needs to listen to this.
Hold on for a sec.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, this is really for you. I didn't mean to, I had some specific concerns, but I didn't mean to suggest that those are the only concerns. And I think that I would ask that we empower, I don't know if we have to do this formally or not, I doubt, again, certainly not a vote, but in the review process, I would ask that we support Andrew in reviewing that to make sure that there's nothing in there that is inconsistent with the site plan review to the extent some of this is going to fall on Andrew as a responsibility. So I would just ask that he be aware that I wasn't trying to restrict that any more than it was. And if anything, empower him, open it up to review it, make sure that he's comfortable with it, and that it's consistent with the 13923 site plan review. That's all.
Good, thank you. All right. I think that was serious, but anyways. All right, good. So I think staff, Mr. Arminetti, you good at this point with where we're at?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've gotten good direction, and it's fairly consistent across the two subdivisions, as we said. So.
Good, all right. So let me open this phase of the public hearing up at this point, if anyone would like to comment. Come on down, please. Hi.
Good evening, Alexandra Titherdale and 25B Daffodil. I'm speaking both as a homeowner in the neighborhood and also as one of the members of the Board of Trustees for our HOA. We've been working really hard, Dave Small and myself as the other trustee member, to try and protect our neighborhood. People who bought into Cedar Crest 3 and probably Cedar Crest 1 bought into this years and years ago when there was this wonderful plan set up as to what this neighborhood was going to look at. I suspect that a lot of the people who bought in then probably wouldn't even qualify for some of the new houses going in. So we really are reaching out to you to try and preserve our investments in this neighborhood. Scott and I have only, fairly recently purchased into the neighborhood, but it's a wonderful community and it's a year-round community. There aren't many people there who don't have the lights on all year round. So when we talk to you about having a buffer zone that we really are asking you to protect, please, please, please listen to us. We've been trying to work We've been trying to work with Richmond. And yes, negotiations are continuing, but I would just like to comment that things aren't resting with us at the moment. They're resting completely on their side of the table, waiting to hear back from them. We are agreeable to meetings. So it's not like we are not bending over backwards to try and reach a compromise as you have asked us to do. We've put to them our views on how we would like the neighborhood to look, and the buffer zones are really, really essential to what we feel are ways to protect our neighborhood. So, we just cannot repeat this enough.
Yep.
Please try and preserve the nature of our neighborhood by looking at what we have asked to be taken into account on those lots 20 through 26. I know that was Sandpiper 1, but then we're also talking about the buffer zone 11 through 15.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else I can say, I just want to reiterate, those are central to our concerns, and we really, really do implore the planning board to listen to them and take them on board.
Could you maybe articulate a little further exactly what you're looking for? I mean, I think the board hears what you're saying, but if specifically...
We want our neighborhood to continue to look like our neighborhood. We don't want to see these lots broken down into multi-family households. We like our 10,000 square foot sort of size area. You've got single families, people who are there all year round. We would like some continuity within our neighborhood. We don't want to go around the corner into Evergreen and then suddenly see 20 new houses on what was supposed to be, 5 big, beautiful lots. We are going to be suffering from a lot more traffic. That's a given. Daffodil does take the brunt of anybody coming from Old South and then heading around onto that side of Evergreen. We've said it before, time and time again. Children play in the streets. There are dogs off leash all around the area. There are safety issues, and we want our community to stay the nice, safe community that it is. And aesthetically, we would like it to look similar the whole way around.
So, I thank you. But when you say buffer zones, are you talking just you want to restrict them to just a primary dwelling only, no secondaries or anything? Are you talking that you want a 20-foot separation, a 40-foot? I'm just asking.
I believe.
Again, I know you're negotiating with them.
I believe we have set out a vegetative border
Yep.
behind 11 through 15. I don't remember the exact detail that we've got. If Mr. Armanetti can say the amount in the draft agreement, it's not something that we're contending with, or we find contentious in terms of the border.
Right. Anything else?
But yeah, again, we believe those should be 10,000 square foot lots and not broken down into smaller lots.
They are 10,000 square
They are
feet.
10,000.
But if you were to allow secondary dwellings, then you are essentially breaking them down further.
No, we're not. No,
It
no.
doesn't work that way for zoning.
Right. They don't automatically become 5,000 square foot lots. There are 2 dwellings on a 10,000 square foot lot. Let's be clear.
Which is what every 10,000 square foot lot
But-
zone in the town has.
Correct.
But as you've heard earlier this evening, it's not what we have in our homeowners association.
Correct. And that I think we hear as well too. But I just want to be clear because we seem to keep drifting back into that it automatically becomes a 5,000 square foot lot, and that is not the case.
It's the
But
effect.
It's
is
the,
what we're
okay,
getting.
and
Yeah.
there you go. I can live with you using the words the effect of. Okay, that's a little different than just saying they are.
And just a point in relation to the pools, although I know we don't want to get into a major discussion, the houses in Cedar Crest 3 and 1, I think maybe there are 2 houses which have pools within them. So if you're
Four on
looking
the
at the
aerial
lots,
on the south side of Evergreen, but nothing on the north
That's
side.
okay. Let her finish though. Go ahead.
the point is there aren't many pools. So any pools which were to be considered should be again taken into account with the over, the way the neighborhood looks.
Is there anything else?
That's it. Thank you.
Right. Just one thing I want to say to you: children playing in the streets. Boy, you know what you just sold me on right now? How much more we need those pocket parks they're going to put in place, or the parks they're going to put in, and how we need to have pedestrian. I'm just going to finish. How we need those pedestrian easements to get your children into those parks, into a much safer place.
When I say children playing in the streets, they're tend to going from one house to another. We've got some beautiful lots with amazing backyards, and that's where the kids are going to.
Okay, we love them playing in the yards, but it's a common nomenclature that always concerns me in Nantucket when I hear our children play in the streets. It's like, okay. I don't want to belabor the point though. Thank you. Anyone else? No. All right. So, is there anything else from the board or staff, or do you think we're in pretty clear motion at this point?
I got one little thing.
Yeah, please.
Maybe the buffer zone lots could have no swimming pools.
Oh, I think don't.
I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know where you're gonna come out on that, but
How could you restrict only
You
those?
can't do that.
Well, because they face the neighborhood
Sure
that's
you could.
not part of the other
But
neighborhood.
they also have a 20-foot buffer zone where you can't put that.
Yeah, the other.
just,
But they're still working on how they want to handle the pool thing.
yeah, okay, okay.
Right. And I,
Yeah, let them figure that out.
That might eliminate that
Thanks.
altogether.
No, through you, Mr. Chairman. We
Yeah.
appreciate the suggestion. As Patty said, we'll take that back to Phil and kick it around, and we'll try and come back with you with something more definitive by next week.
Great. I'd just like to get a little more clarity while we're on this topic. When the lots 20 through 26, those we're currently saying those are 10,000 square feet, obviously drawn out. But those are not being limited in any way other than, are tertiary dwellings allowed?
No.
No.
Are secondary dwellings allowed?
At the moment.
Okay, so
Yes.
I would suggest that perhaps as a concession with your neighbors, while not dramatically reducing the marketability of those units, that you might accept or put forth a condition that those would be single-family with accessory apartments allowed, but not a second dwelling. It's just a suggestion. The other question I have, are we going to see, is there a vegetative buffer proposed along the length of, I understand 11 through 15, but also 20 through 26? So we're creating a sense of, look, this is clearly, this side, 20 through 26 has clearly been laid out so that it appears to be part of this neighborhood versus part of the other neighborhood.
No, it's the opposite.
hold on, Mr. Armanetti.
I'm just curious.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. No,
Let
to
me go right
the
to him.
question, lots 20 through 26, we see a little differently in that, as Mr. Lowell just pointed out, they face the existing neighborhood off Evergreen. Clearly, those will be the backyards of those lots, and they are relatively large, so I think there is going to be a fair amount of vegetation there. But we don't feel it's necessary to have a mandatory or a formal buffer zone in that area. That I think gets to restricting the property rights of those lots a little too much.
Yeah, I don't have an issue. I was just curious if that was in place. And I do believe that the fact that they're facing the neighborhood lower down and they have the larger yards is going to, it's going to create a buffer in and of itself, the depth of the area. 11 through 14, is that going to be, is the vegetative buffer called out with, I know in the 40Bs it's called out with some specificity in terms of the number of, the density of planting and the height of plantings, and it's also shown with actual dimensions. And I would like to think that at least we would have in our final plan that would be dimensioned so that in years coming forward, it's memorialized that this is the buffer, not just a narrative someplace buried in text. I don't know that you would consider that normal or not, but in what I've seen, it's kind of normal.
Do you have a comment there, Andrew?
I do. I don't. We certainly can require it would be one of the plans that we would get as part of the landscaping plan, the plan set that would come in that you all would sign. But I guess, I'm not, again, there are bigger, deeper lots bordering this, and they don't have buffers on them. These are yards meeting yards. So if people put fences between the yards and, I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about here.
May I?
Sure.
My understanding is that these lots are clearly the zoning, what's the zoning classification in 11 through 14?
Okay.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Everything is zoned R5. I think the point you're making is that area is subject to the 20-foot buffer zone between the workforce housing lots and any adjacent residentially zoned land. So there is the 20-foot is formally established. We can certainly show that on the subdivision plans, and most of the plans we've been working with show that. I think to Mr. Vorse's point, I think it'll happen a little more organically, and I think Mr. Allen, frankly, inferred that in some of his comments. And one of the things we're trying to be cognizant of this portion of the neighborhood, and Patty and I have been discussing this quite a bit, is particularly in those lots to try and maintain as much of the existing vegetation that's already mature and is natural, as opposed to blowing through there and then putting in new immature stuff that's going to take a while to grow up. So I don't think we want to limit ourselves to certain species or certain numbers. We want to try and keep that buffer as natural as possible and have it just fit into the neighborhood as it currently is. That's our intent.
If I may, through Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't suggest that we remove, I think the biggest thing we've looked at what happened when it used to be South Valley, and that place was clear cut, and it took forever before they renamed it Naw Shop and planted trees and put houses in. It was kind of a blight.
It was an asphalt plant.
For a long time. But it was clear cut, and the problem is it was clear cut. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting new or immature plants. I'm just suggesting that it would be memorialized in the plan. This is the buffer zone. And the reason I thought it was important is these are R5 lots, correct? And the neighboring lots are
R20.
Okay, so you have differing setback requirements from your rear setback line. And this is a way to protect the existing neighbors to some extent. I'm not suggesting, again, clear cutting. You could leave indigenous materials in place. It's just a thought. I'm putting it out there for us to consider, whether we do it now or later. But I do think it's important to kind of.
Yep. The requirement of the bylaw is the 20-foot buffer is going to be there. So the effective setback for the houses for habitable buildings is 20 feet from that back line. So the houses on those lots, I don't know what the depth is there.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe those are almost 100 feet deep, 90, 95, 98, plus or minus.
So we're covered.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Good. Anything else? I think you've got a clear sense of direction for us as well.
We do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I'd asked is were you going to take a few minutes on the notes too? If not, I just wanted to make one point on that. Not to drag you away, but I think it's important enough.
I know there's a number of issues that have got to come up along it. do you just need some basic guidance with things, or?
I'd like to just stick to the sandpipers myself.
I don't want to go to the hotel.
Yeah.
I don't want, I
I've had
think
enough.
the whole board's kind of
I've
at
had
a
enough.
stage of where we're not ready to go into great depth, but if there's some,
Just a question, would you like us to ask the engineers to rework, I mean, not to be done by Tuesday, but if we had sort of a sample,
Or a schematic.
a schematic for next time,
Yeah.
at least with the buildings? Is that possible?
Yeah.
If we could also see the sidewalks that were being changed. Because didn't some of the sidewalks in that area were changed because there was going to be, or was that only in the sandpipers that it was sidewalk width and locations were changed?
hold on,
I think, to you, Mr. Chairman, the only point we made in last week's hearing was we had started with a 5-foot wide multi-purpose path, and we went up to 6 after we met with the staff and talked it through a little bit. So that would be consistent throughout both the Sandpiper and the Meadows projects, would have a 6-foot wide multi-purpose path on one side of the roads. In the case of Sandpiper, all the roads. In the case of the Meadows too, the spine road that kind of runs from east to west off of Nancy Ann.
Okay, so my point, that's what I recall, because I wasn't at the meeting, I watched the video.
All right.
My point is that if you're going to go through the trouble of doing a schematic of the layout, it would be helpful if you reflected where you're intending to have the sidewalk on one side and not on the other, because now you're showing on both sides. It will free up you're going to need to know it anyways. So it just gives us a better idea of what you're proposing, that's all.
We'll make it a goal.
okay. Did that, was there anything else?
No, that was my only point, Mr. Chairman, was
good.
with respect to Meadows 2, I just don't want to create an expectation that we can really refine the design of those individual buildings before you take action on the special permit, and I don't think that's the intent. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. We can take a shot at tweaking it some more between now and next week, but we really want to focus some time and effort on that architectural and siting design and placement of buildings and give it the time that it's due. And a week or two is a lot less time than we would need, and I think a lot less time than the board and the staff would want us to attribute to it.
Got it. Okay. Good, Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, for some general direction, are we talking about on Nancy Ann, are we talking about a sidewalk along that? Holly, can you bring that down a little bit? I mean,
I could probably start to answer the question, Mr. Chairman, if you would.
Yeah, go ahead.
What we started to talk about, in some detail, if I remember right, was given the industrial and commercial nature of the uses on the west side of Nancy Ann, to put more of a berm right on the east side of Nancy Ann, keep all the sidewalk internal that would run from north to south through the meadows and would come out somewhere around the crossroad there between Gregland and Nancy Ann, but that for the 900 or 950 feet or so that runs from Dave Kim to kind of that curve where just below the line where it says 18 units phase 4, the sidewalk would actually be within the project, and on the face of Nancy Ann, the east side of Nancy Ann Lane, there would be a vegetated berm to create more of a separation there and an aesthetic separation. So there would not be a sidewalk per se on Nancy Ann Lane on our side.
and so, and Mr. Chairman, through you, so Nancy Ann is intended to be no on-street parking. That's really just travel back and forth.
Correct.
If you saw the uses, you would recognize, I mean,
Yep.
you've got to retain, obviously, Cape Cod Express, Coca-Cola.
Yep. And just in terms of an area that, I mean, one of the places that I think you could look at is the location between Lot 2 and Lot 4. There's sort of a smaller parking lot in the dead center there that I think if that parking were made up elsewhere, again, you might start getting more of a larger space. I also think the parking lot on next to Lot 47 on part of Lot 4.
Yeah.
Again, if there was a location for a community pool, that would be a great location for that, and maybe that parking might be redistributed in another spot.
I'm pretty, I think I'm pretty confident in saying we're not going to be introducing a community pool in this phase.
No, I know. I'm just saying that in terms of setting aside a space
I see.
for it in the future,
Yeah.
that spot seems to make some sense. And I think buildings on like lot 2 that are at angles, tend to really eat up a lot of space and create kind of useless areas in between buildings. I'd look to square those off and make those tighter where possible, again, to get more quality open space.
Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, one other thing, I don't know if we've talked about it, but I do think some space for a community garden somewhere in here. I don't know if that's on lot 8. There's something there that I don't know what that is. I'll let you go over a little bit.
Where, the single family or the meadows?
No, just talking about meadows.
Oh, okay.
I think single families, if they want gardens, that would go on their own lots, but I think
Right.
apartment buildings, right, I don't know what that is there.
Yeah, there's a lot of space in that back corner, actually.
Good. All right. That's good.
Yeah, Andrew, we're good.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of apartments.
Just before you guys start your schematic, and having had some experience with this, I would suggest that you consider clustering more tightly where you can,
Oh, good.
in conjunction with internal noise controls. With the apartments, you're going to be afforded a lot more control over noise than just simply relying on the town bylaw. The people who are going to tend to live in the apartments are going to be accustomed to being in tight quarters, vertically, horizontally. You don't need as much space as may be indicated on the drawing, and that may give you an opportunity for not just the usable park space as opposed to pocket parks, but at the same time it might give you some space for a garden area or a future community pool or something like that where you're setting aside a little bit of space. It's just a suggestion, just throw it out there. So as opposed to you coming and having the schematic and going through all the work, you're getting these suggestions after the fact, that's all.
Yep. Anything else?
I think we can go home.
All right. Is there anything else from the public at this point? No. All right. So, motion would be appropriate to continue to February 9th.
I'll make a motion to continue to 4 o'clock on February 9th. All the
Can you
special
just hold
permits.
that? I'm sorry.
Hold it. All the special permits.
Yeah.
Just for scheduling, I'm not available on February 16th, 23rd, or March 2nd. They're all Thursdays. Just to let you know.
But you're here next Thursday.
I'm here next Thursday, and I'm
You're
here
the
Monday.
the 13th. So
Yeah.
that's all we need for this.
Yeah. Okay, so, I'm sorry, your motion was
Motion
now
to
in order.
approve, to continue all of the special permits to next Thursday at 4 o'clock.
Great, do I hear a second? Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, ayes have unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Motion to adjourn.
I think we're good.
All in favor? Aye.